All right, we are live.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. مساء الخير لشعبنا بفلسطين وفي كل مكان. نبدأ كالعادة بالتعريف بأنه جامعة سان فرانسيسكو، بدي أحكي بالعربي بالأول بعدين بحكي بالإنجليزي. جامعة سان فرانسيسكو مبنية على أرض أهل البلاد الأصليين الألوني، وبالتالي فهي أرض مسلوبة كما هي أرض فلسطين. I begin by acknowledging that San Francisco State sits on the stolen indigenous land of the Ohlone Nation, and we also begin by acknowledging and honoring on this day, on the International Day of Solidarity with the people of Palestine, the fallen in Palestine and around the world who have fallen for freedom, for justice, for all. And if we mention all the names, we won't be able to finish the webinar today. But take a moment and think of all the martyrs, the prisoners, the people who lost their livelihood, the people who lost their jobs, the people who were blocked, the people who become disabled, and everybody who has suffered as a result of injustices in Palestine and around the world. I want to thank several people who have been part of this, and we continue. The thanks are many, multitude, and we will continue doing them throughout, and we will never finish again. So it's an open-ended question. I first want to thank our amazing panelists who are joining us from back home. And I'm saying back home deliberately because we are here in the US today for the four of us, the team members who are organizing this webinar, and the co-sponsors who came with us. This is sort of home, and there is back home in Palestine and in Lebanon. And the people will be discussing what does this mean to be displaced, what does it mean to for this position, and this is the appropriate occasion to actually think through, although every occasion is the occasion. I want to also thank our co-sponsors, and one of my colleagues will actually list them. I want to thank Sarah Sills, who is the artist who designed this flyer and every single flyer in this series of Teaching Palestine. Sarah Sills, who is a leading member of Jewish Voice for Peace in New York City, and she did all of them for us free of charge out of her commitment to justice in for Palestine and for everybody around the world. I would like to thank Westpac, Westchester People's Action Coalition, which acts as our fiscal sponsor for the little dollars we collect here and there in order for us to run some of these webinars. I should emphasize that this is mostly volunteer effort. I want to thank my co-moderators, and I will speak about them later on, and co-organizers. Co-organizers Eyewitness Palestine, Dr. Omar Zahzah is with us today, who is going to be one of the co-moderators. The rest of the team is Salim Shehadeh, who is doctoral candidate at UCLA in anthropology, and we will do more introductions later on. And Anais Amir, who is an undergraduate student in Middle East Studies and Cinema Studies, Media Studies at Wellesley College, activist and leader of Students for Justice in Palestine, as well as co-founder and president of the Arab Women's Organization at Wellesley College. These are some of the people who are with us, and you will hear them as we go on. To start with, I just want to go over the plan. We are going to have 3 rounds of discussion. The first round is going to be introduction to get to know our panelists better. We are posting the bios on the Facebook and everywhere we are streaming this webinar, this open classroom. But we also want to dig a little bit deeper in their biographical data and hear who they are and have everybody tell us who they are and what are they doing and why are they here today, what brings us all together today. Obviously, we did invite them, so this is not accidental and it's not random. There is a reason for all of it that will become clear as we go on. The first round is going to be 3-minute introduction. The second round is going to be 5-minute discussion, and the third round is going to be 3 minutes. The co-moderators for this open classroom is, as I said, Dr. Omar Zahzah, who is a graduate from University of California, Los Angeles in comparative literature. Very interesting because intersects with Dr. Haider Eid's interest in literature and comparative literature. Really great. And the second co-moderator is Salim Shehadeh, who is a doctoral candidate, and actually Saliem defended his prospectus for his PhD on September 22nd, the night before our webinar whose narratives was censored by Zoom. And this is why we're also on StreamYard and having actually to deal with all these technical difficulties because we intend to continue. This is an open classroom of the Ahmed Studies program, the Arab and Muslim Ethnicity and Diaspora Studies program. And an open classroom is a classroom where students in our classes, in my 4 classes at this point, join and attend either when they attend in person or they can attend afterwards, not in real time later on. We keep our webinars on live online all the time because we believe they will be useful for people to hear from various viewpoints. Specifically today, we are actually centering Palestinian voices and Palestinian narratives and Palestinian uh, reflections and critical analysis. And so the students afterwards can actually write assignments on this or anything else. And it is an open classroom because we believe seriously in bringing the academy and the university together to learn with each other, to study with each other, to co-learn, to co-teach, to teach in Palestine, which is a project that we've started, and I can speak about that a little bit later. But right now I'm going to actually move into why is it that November 29th, and I'll take a minute to speak about when I was growing up in Palestine. For me, November 29th was the day of the partition, التقسيم. That was a terrible day. This was just like Balfour Declaration, November 2nd, or May 15th, Naqba. This is the day that we will actually, it would be a day of mourning for Palestinians. It was for some of us a day to boycott, not to go to school, strike. This is a strike was one of the ways we declared our resistance and our opposition to the status quo of the occupation. And so it wasn't until I was a graduate, a college student in 1981 in the US that the November 29th became a different day because on November 29th, actually November 28th, 1981, a big, large coalition of over 100 people came together to organize the largest demonstration at that time, national demonstration in the UN, in the United States, at the United Nations headquarters, commemorating the International Day of Solidarity with the people of Palestine. And I was a student at Madison, Wisconsin. I remember taking a car to Chicago and then taking buses, multiple buses, went to Washington, D.C. And it's very interesting because we used to stop in Delaware, which is the state of the president-elect of the U.S. And I always think when people say Delaware, I said, oh, this is where the buses stop so we can get coffee and sandwiches and so on. Of course, to each their own. But this is anyway. So we had this incredible demonstration, and we can speak about over 100 endorsers, including the ambassador of Grenada, including the African National Congress, Southwest People's Action, organizing SWAPO, the FDRFMLN, the Sandinista, Patrice Lumumba Coalition, African and Caribbean Resources, and many, many, many organizations from around the US, some Arab Palestinian, some Muslim, some Third World, some US, everywhere, including many anti-Zionist groups who were actually historically organizing with the Palestinians. Fast forward in 1982, Israel invades Lebanon. And so the coalition, which was only one-time coalition, one-time event, cuts together and creates the November 29th coalition and actually takes over and organizes multiple activities throughout the summer, that very bad summer of 1982, and also when the Sabra and Shatila massacre takes place on September 17, 16, 17 in 1982. Shortly afterwards, there was a need to continue organizing around Palestine. So I was actually part of the Palestine Solidarity Committee, first on the November 29th coalition, then the Palestine Solidarity Committee. And my idea was that we really need to create not a coalition, but an actual organization. So we used to say November 29th coalition, and we said for Palestine. And sometimes Zionists in the movement will actually add the endorsement only of November 29th, and they would drop for Palestine. We said, why? And they said, oh, it's a typo. So we said, okay, we're going to prevent typos to happen. And we said, okay, we'll call it Palestine Solidarity Committee. So Palestine is up front. You can't have a typo and drop Palestine and say Solidarity Committee. So that was, I mean, one of the ways we resisted, but that was a rhetorical, let's say, discursive device. But Palestine Solidarity Committee ended up being the major organizing solidarity committee in the US.
Hi, everybody. I think that there are technical issues going on right now. Um, so why don't we, hi, everybody. My name is Saliem. I'm going to introduce myself in a little bit, but I actually wanted to give the opportunity to Dr. Omar Zahzah to introduce themselves as one of the co-moderators, and then I'll take over from there. So if you wouldn't mind to start, Omar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Salim. And yeah, hopefully we get Dr. Abdulhadi back as soon as possible. I mean, really, I just wanted to say for just as quickly as possible that, it's a really great honor to be taking part in this conversation with so many esteemed panelists and with so many wonderful co-sponsors. I know we're going to get to breaking that down more concretely in just a few minutes. But I just, I wanted to give some quick reflections, which hopefully will sort of feed into some of the questions in the moderating to come, a little bit about just myself and the work that I've done over the years and the threads that I think bind it all together and sort of bring me to the panel discussion today, and by extension, Eyewitness Palestine and related organizations. So, as was mentioned earlier, earlier on, I was a part of the board of UCLA's Students for Justice in Palestine, particularly from 2012. And as many of you know, with Students for Justice in Palestine, the primary work is educating people about the Palestinian struggle with various programming and events and passing divestment. And, we definitely had our ups and downs and struggles with that. From 2015, I've been a member of the Palestinian Youth Movement, an organization dedicated to rekindling a collective sense of national affiliation and stakes in the liberation of Palestine among Palestinian and/or Arab youth in the diaspora. And then from 2012 to 2020, I was involved in a PhD program completing a dissertation about how the meaning-making conventions of language and narrative tropes are used both to justify repressive state logics of pacification, as well as galvanizing expressions of resistance and liberation in Black and Arab American writing. And from 2020, after graduating with my doctorate, I've been the education advocacy coordinator for Eyewitness Palestine. So very quickly, before we turn it over to my co-moderator and to the esteemed panelists, I just wanted to say that, for me personally, I think for many hearing this, it sounds like there's some disconnect, but I've actually found a lot of continuity between these fields and the work we're doing here today. Because as the very title of this event reflects, so much of it comes back to narrative. Colonization is often about narrative erasure and displacement, or justifying oppression through euphemism, whereas resistance comes to mean not only preserving or archiving original traces, but continuing to form and reform narratives of liberation and freedom that resist the founding premises of colonial realities and societies, including by forming symbolic linkages of solidarity and joint struggle. And I don't think that in the end, narrative is inseparable from education. From what I saw from teaching my students about Palestine and joint struggle through the words of Suhair Hamad, June Jordan, and Mahmoud Darwish at UCLA some time ago, to my current role in Eyewitness Palestine, where we show scores of activists and organizers how the Palestinian struggle is consonant with racial justice and equity frameworks, as well as continue to find ways for Palestinians to speak their native truths to delegates. Justice-centered education is in and of itself a narrative intervention. And I think so many of us here and watching have experienced that's precisely why our narrative efforts continue to be subjected to such intense repression and backlash. There's definitely a lot more to say, but I'll leave it at that. Looking forward to the ensuing conversation, and I'm turning it over to my esteemed co-moderator, Salim Shehadeh.
Sorry, my mic was muted. Thank you, Omar. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to just say a few words in terms of introduction of who I am and what brings me into this space. And I think that the topic of Palestinian organizing and solidarity is one that's deep-seated in my heart. So I am currently a PhD candidate at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, in anthropology. My work is on Palestinian student organizing in general, but specifically doing ethnography and historical ethnography on the General Union of Palestine Students. I am also work closely with Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi through the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diasporas program, kind of tracing my my history, if you will, of going kind of now backwards is I finished my master's at San Francisco State University, compiling an oral history of the General Union of Palestine Students there at that chapter, the last standing chapter in the United States, looking at the years 2000 to 2017. Before completing my master's at San Francisco State University, I was an undergrad at the University of California, Davis, UC Davis. And there I was part of SJP. And like Omar said, you know, we do a lot of work we did a lot of divestment work. It was our year, the year that we were there, that we began the process. After 3 long years, it passed, and there's a whole narrative there. But I actually wanted to share the narrative of like how I got into doing Palestine, like doing Palestine student organizing work and doing kind of the research with it. And I always like to say that the reason why I got involved in SJP was actually because of Occupy Wall Street. If you all remember that movement in 2010, from 2008 to 2010, to address kind of like, you know, that large term, we are the 99%, right? That came out of that period of kind of addressing capitalist extraction and just massive exploitation of the masses and the crash of the housing market. What happened was students at UC Davis organized a sit-in around in the spirit of kind of addressing the neoliberal shifts of the university and the higher tuition and the corporatization of the university and all that stuff. And it was actually led by a radical kind of anti-imperialist base. And one of the co-organizers was a Palestinian woman, student at the university. And there was this huge event where the chancellor of the university ordered the encampment that was taking place on campus to be dismantled by police force. And the police came in and they pepper sprayed the students on campus. The following Monday, you know, this received national attention. The following Monday, students organized the largest congregation of student protesters at UC Davis history, in its entire history. And one of the main speakers was this Palestinian woman who was a leader of Students for Justice in Palestine. And she got up on that stage and she talked about how the connections of when she got pepper sprayed, how this was intimately related to the mechanisms of policing that Israel does day in and day out against Palestinians. And she shared how when she saw her comrades being pepper sprayed, she knew to run into the cafeteria, grab a quart of milk, dab her hatta in the milk, and wipe the eyes of the protesters with the milk in order to get the pepper spray out, and how she learned it when she was with her cousins growing up in summers and going to demonstrations and Israel releasing the chemical toxin of tear gas onto her and her cousins and the communities that are organizing. And she learned it from that space and she brought it here. And it just so, for me, as an 18-year-old Palestinian just getting into college, I was like, what is this that like Palestine is being so centered at this huge important event taking place right now, politically and economically. And so that's what got me into SJP. And from there, I haven't left, right? It's been 10 years since then. And I'm still doing Palestine student organizing. I'm still doing, I'm dedicating my PhD to writing about Palestinian organizing. So, things like this have huge impacts. And we'll be talking about it more throughout the panel, but I just wanted to share that little narrative about me. I also wanted to say, I also wanted to thank our sponsors before I pass it over back to Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi. What we have are our co-sponsors are Alliance for Water Justice in Palestine. We have Eyewitness Palestine. We have Friends of Sabil North America, Voice for Peace Boston. We have Labor for Palestine. We have Northern California Friends of Sabil. We have Palestinian Youth Movement. And we have Within Our Lifetime United for Palestine as our co-sponsors for the event today. And with that, I believe Dr. Abdulhadi's technical issues were resolved, so I'm going to pass it over.
Yes, thank you so much. Somehow the power completely went off. So I don't know what's happening. We're not in Gaza. So, but something is going on. This happened, by the way, several times before. I don't know what the mystery is, but I will talk about what I was speaking later on. But now it is actually my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists and have them kind of like talk about what we do. I'm actually trying to just find the document. Okay, yeah. So we are going to have we're going to start with Ms. Samia Khoury, whom I've known for a very long time, and I'm so honored to have you. Ms. Samia Nasser Khoury, we are asking you, the bio is posted now. So what we're going to do, we're going to ask each panelist to speak for 3 minutes about their own experiences, how they interact, how they confront, how do they see partition, how does it feel to them, how does that period, and so on. So we would like to ask you, Ms. Khoury, to reflect on your experiences with the various groups you worked with. In your bio, you mentioned YWCA, you mentioned Beirut University Board of Trustees, you mentioned being a Jerusalemite and someone who has been active in Palestinian women's movement. Can you just speak about that? Can you tell us about your work in Jerusalem and the other aspects that you can have?
Am I on? Do you hear me? I'm on mute, yes, or do you hear me?
You're good.
We can hear you.
I was born in Jaffa, the town of my mother, for 5 years in Ramle. And then I came to a boarding school at Beirut College, which was a high school at the time, and a boarding section as early as 5 years old. So I stayed there until I graduated in 1950. And then I went to the United States and got my BBA from Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. But when I came back, I started working at Beirut, actually. I worked for 6 years until I got married in 1960. And then afterwards, I didn't work. I started raising my family. But, and I feel that raising a family is just as important as working because, but I did, all my work was volunteer work later on because I had to choose my time and I was able to contribute to. So the YWCA.
Looks like we lost her for technical difficulties. Dr. Abdulhadi, if you wanted to maybe continue and we'll return. You're muted.
So, and hold Zoom accountable and or have open source actually that provides these platforms for us, which would be much better. But I want to go next to Dr. Haider Eid. And Dr. Haider Eid, as people know, is a professor of comparative literature at Al-Aqsa University in Gaza. He's joining us from Gaza. And Dr. Eid, we wanted to ask you a little bit about your background, also as a Palestinian, to maybe discuss being a Palestinian with South African citizenship. Why did you return to Gaza, and why do I know you always refuse in academic invitations to leave? You always say, I won't. And many times there were panels where we actually had an empty chair for you. What can you tell us about that? What can you tell us about being a university professor in Gaza? What about your students? What's going on? Please share with us.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Rabab. And I would like to start by thanking all the organizers of this very important event. And I thought I would be the only one who would have technical problems because, you know, speaking to you from Gaza, and, you know, Gaza has been under this medieval siege since 2006. And one of the first things that Israeli forces apartheid Israel decided to do in 2006, 2007 is to attack the only power station that the Gaza Strip has. And this is why I'm talking to you right now using a generator. So I'm not sure whether I'm gonna, last till the last question here with you. So I'm sure you will understand what is happening if I suddenly get disconnected. And because I'm using a generator right now, we use the generator for 2 or 3 hours a day. So we are supposed to finish using the generator between 9 and 10 o'clock Gaza time. So I hope that you will understand this. But let me start very quickly by giving you a brief idea about my background. And as Dr. Rabab has just said, I'm Haider and I'm an associate professor of comparative literature cultural studies at Al-Aqsa University. I was born in the 60s and I grew up in Gaza until I became 18 years old, after which my parents decided that I should study engineering, and they sent me to the American University in Cairo, but that was in the early 80s after the invasion of Lebanon, and that was in fact the beginning of, I would call it, radicalization of my consciousness after the Sabra and Shatila massacre. And I decided to leave the American University. I spent about 4 to 5 months in Egypt, and to come back to Gaza. But then I was sent again to Czechoslovakia. At the time, it was, of course, it was not the Czech Republic, it was Czechoslovakia, to get my engineering degree, and I didn't like it at all, and that's why I decided to change my my field of study. And I came back to Gaza at the beginning, or rather before the beginning of the first Intifada, and I joined Bethlehem University in the West Bank for 1 month, after which the first Intifada erupted, and I came back to Gaza, and I joined the first Intifada. And I spent the first couple of years of the first Intifada here in Gaza until the early 90s, because all universities in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, as most of you already know, were closed at the time by the Israelis, and that's why I decided to continue my studies at Eastern Mediterranean University in Cyprus. And I got my BA in literature, and my master's degree as well, and I worked for a year there. So I spent about 6.5 years in Cyprus, after which I decided to apply for a scholarship in South Africa. And in fact, it was my dream to further my studies in South Africa, because I wanted to learn about the struggle against the apartheid system of South Africa. I had already read a lot about Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Steve Biko, other African national liberation movements as well. And I went to South Africa in 1997, and I started working on my PhD degree, and I started working at the time it was called Vista University. Notice it was 1997, which means 3 years after the collapse of the apartheid system. Nelson Mandela had already been released in 1990, and then was elected as the first Black president of multiracial South Africa, the new democratic South Africa in 1994. So I reached South Africa in 1997. And it was a fascinating experience, because I really wanted to know and to learn from those anti-apartheid activists, from the likes of Ahmed Kathrada, Desmond Tutu, my friend Comrade Ronnie Kasres, and all the other comrades of the Palestine Solidarity Committees and groups there in South Africa. But I was more interested in learning about the BDS campaign, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and how it worked. And I learned at the time that the first call was issued in the late 50s in 1958 by a handful of ANC, African National Congress activists in London in 1958. And the word at the beginning didn't heed the call made by Black South Africans until the mid-80s. After the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, 1961, after the Soweto Intifada, the Soweto uprising in 1976, etc. And it was a very rich experience that I thought that we Palestinians needed to learn from. And that is what happened exactly. Palestinian civil society in 2005 decided to issue the BDS call that everybody knows right now, calling on the international community to boycott apartheid Israel, divest from it and from companies benefiting from its occupation of Palestine, and imposing sanctions against it until it complies with international law. That was the most important lesson that I think that I learned from South Africa, in addition to what they called the pillars of struggle, popular resistance, etc., etc. And then after getting my PhD degree, I decided to come back to Palestine because I always believed that every Palestinian should return to Palestine because the Zionist myth is that, this is a land without a people for a people without a land. And this is why they worked on emptying Palestine from Palestinians in order to prove that there are no Palestinians. This infamous sentence said by Golda Meir in 1967 when she was asked about the Palestinian people. And therefore, I believe that no single Palestinian, especially those who hold degrees, should come back and fulfill their duties here in Palestine. And then I decided to come back in 2000. And at the time, I joined Al-Quds University, and that was the beginning of, the second Intifada. And I wanted to work in the West Bank and Najah University, and I was corresponding with Birzeit University. Unfortunately, the Israelis did not allow me to leave Gaza and go to the West Bank. And therefore, I stayed for a year in Gaza, and then I went back to South Africa. I applied for a job in a position in China. I spent a year in China after that, after leaving South Africa. And then I worked in Oman and the United Arab Emirates. But I always had it on my mind that I had to come back. Unfortunately, my parents, who come from the ethnically cleansed village of Zarnuga, and I will talk about Zarnuga in the second round of questions. Both of them died in 2005, and I couldn't attend their funerals. Unfortunately, I was not allowed at the time by the Israelis to return to Gaza. And at the end of 2005, I managed to come back to Gaza, and I applied for a position at Al-Aqsa University, and I have been teaching at Al-Aqsa University since then. I've been teaching comparative literature, but in fact, what I teach is, literature in translation, especially Palestinian literature. I've been teaching, the works of Ghassan Kanafani, his novels, Men in the Sun, All That Is Left to You, and my students love this literature. They love it. They love it. And I have also been teaching them, the works of Edward Said, Franz Fanon, Amilcar Cabral, etc., etc. I think, in the second round of questions, I will talk about, life under, the Israeli siege of Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haider. I mean, you've covered a lot of things, and you were saying things that I just wanted to jump back and ask, but I will actually, I see that Ms. Khoury is back. So are you ready to resume? I don't know what happened. There's too many technical difficulties. Are you ready to continue what you were speaking about, Ms. Khoury? Well, you were talking about like being a homemaker and working inside the home, i.e. not working in gainful employment, but you were working nonetheless. So do you want to continue? I will turn it over to you. Go ahead.
I don't know whether, where you stopped hearing me, huh? Do you hear me?
We stopped hearing you when you said that you got married and you started working in the house. You were not making gainful employment, but you were still working as a homemaker in the home, taking care of your family. So that's where you start, where the mic went off. Please resume.
So you didn't hear anything about what I spoke about the YWCA and Sabil?
No, none. Go ahead. Sorry, it didn't come on. Yeah.
My goodness, I thought I was done. I mean, I spoke and I thought I was done. So this seems to be a very, well, I said in the meantime, Birzeit developed to become the first university in Palestine in 1974, and the family registered all its grounds and its responsibility in the name of the newly established board of trustees. And I feel honored to be a founding member of that board, along with my brother and sister, on which we still serve. Actually, this is the only board I've not completely retired from, because. But then, I mean, YWCA movement, and they have more than 80 organizations on the national level. And they used to come also, we would receive guests over in Jerusalem, because the YWCA in Jerusalem had a hotel, which doesn't exist anymore now. But, and that was one venue we could use to speak to the guests that stayed at the hotel. And we would make action alerts, and they would spread it all over the world, and we alert them to what is happening over in Palestine. And of course, then the Sabil Liberation Theology was another venue, because, and it was very important, because religion and the Bible have been used and abused to justify what Israel is doing to the Palestinians and depriving them of their own narrative. I mean, saying that God gave them the land and so on. I mean, such rubbish. And so we have studied how to use the Bible from a Palestinian point of view, and to educate our visitors and our friends all over the world. We have groups of Palestinian friends of Am I still on? Hello?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Yeah. Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay.
Please, yeah.
We have friends of Sabil in North America, in Europe, in Oceania, and that's a very, very widespread movement now. And we have publications that we write a magazine every month and every quarterly or something month. And we have something called the Wave of Prayer, which we use to report about incidents that are happening, like demolishing of homes and prisoners of conscience and all these. We put them and we say a prayer for them, so that it means something to the people. We humanize the incident. And of course, we feel that there isn't enough action. I mean, the solidarity groups sometimes, like the European Union, they come and they say it is not acceptable, or they do. But that does not help, because unless you really take action and make Israel pay a price for what it is doing, they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. The sky is the limit. There is no limit in their to their borders. And they don't want, actually, they very well don't want peace. And when they signed this Oslo agreement, and the mere fact that they deferred all the important issues to 5 years, which ended up 20 years, and it closed Jerusalem, and it really killed Jerusalem. It is very sad, because, I mean, the Jerusalem community have felt abandoned, and it is, hands are tied, they can't do anything. They have appointed a minister for Jerusalem, a governor for Jerusalem, but every time that minister, that poor minister, or that government does anything, they interrogate him or they imprison him. So it is a very bad situation now, very bad, really. And as women's movements, I mean, part of the Union of Palestinian Women, we were very active until the Oslo, because our hands were tied. I mean, we couldn't do anything anymore. We tried as much as possible, but at the time we were very active. We were taking care of the prisoners. We were taking care of the injured in hospitals, visiting them, and going in solidarity visits to people who have been suffered, or their children have suffered, and so on. So it has been a very, very challenging and at the same time very sad time, very sad times. But we were able to do something. We felt we achieved. But after Oslo, it has killed the spirit of the people. And this infighting between all the factions. I mean, there was no difference between anybody when everybody had one goal together. Now we feel that everybody is working on their own and for their own interest and their own vested interests. I mean, this is one of the values that I must admit we as a family. I mean, I personally, the influence of my parents on my upbringing was so important, to feel the importance of working towards the common good. The common good comes first. My father used to tell us, the country comes first, the town then, and then the family, and then your personal interest. So that was very, very important. And luckily I married a man who was very, very supportive of my work. And he really gave me a lot of space and helped with the children. And he used to always joke with my friends, telling them, do you know what the YWCA stands for? Your wife constantly away. This is always a joke for the men of the YWCA members, because they get involved and there is no limit. Also, I was involved with Rawdat al-Zuhur, which is really a very small but very beautiful school. It started by another aunt of mine as a home for destitute girls. I feel it's like my baby. I served there 17 years, but I can't abandon them. I'm always there if they need any support or any help. And it became a completely elementary co-educational school after 1967, because we felt it could help in maintaining the educational program for the Jerusalem people, because all the public schools started, they were confiscated and taken as part of the municipality, Israeli municipality schools. So it was the private schools and the schools that belonged to organizations that maintained a little bit of the Palestinian spirit in these schools.
So much, Samia. We are actually now going to, since we are going to move now to Shaden Qaws. Shaden Qaws is as people know from the bio, is a student, and she also introduced herself as a student at Beirut University, and her residence is, her family is comes from the Afro-Palestinian community near the Aqsa Mosque. So Shaden will speak in Arabic and I will translate. But we wanted to ask you, building off what Ms. Samia said. She spoke about a couple of things in which you intersect. One is the Jerusalem, and your community lives not very far from the Aqsa Mosque. The Afro-Palestinian community is right next to the Aqsa Mosque, and also Beirut University. So can you speak to us about your how do you commute to the university? What sort of issues do you experience as a student, first year in law, which is really great. We all need more lawyers, especially movement lawyers, to stand up and actually hold Israel accountable. But what are the conditions in Jerusalem? What are the conditions that you live very close to the Aqsa Mosque? What has been going on there? How do you commute to school? What's happening with you? What's happening with Beirut? Can you speak a little bit? And maybe if you have a little time, you can tell us about being a member of Al Funun, the popular dance ensemble, and and what do you do? How do you do? I have a very strong fondness for all the parts of you. So can you speak, and I will translate for you if you don't mind. Go ahead, Shaden.
اوكي مرحبا. بداية أنا شادن قوس وعمري 18 سنة. أنا فلسطينية أفريقية وطالبة قانون سنة أولى في جامعة بيرزيت، وعضوة في فرقة الفنون الشعبية الفلسطينية من 2013، بس نشأت بمدرسة الدبكة من 2008. أنا بسكن بالحي الأفريقي بالبلدة القديمة بالقدس اللي هو على الباب الرئيسي للمسجد الأقصى. بدي أشير شوي عن الحي بالأول الأفريقي بما إنه كثير ناس تجهل عنه. إحنا بالحي كنا من أصول أفريقية وبننحدر من 4 دول اللي هي تشاد السودان ونيجيريا والسنغال. حاليا إحنا اللي بالحي هو الجيل الثاني والثالث، اللي إحنا بنقارب تقريبا 350 نسمة موزعين على 45 عيلة. الحي إحنا عنا مقسم لرباطين، عنا الرباط المنصوري ورباط علاء الدين البصيري، واللي كانوا سجن بالوقت حكم الأتراك. بالأساس كان سبب المجيء للقدس إحنا عنا بالحي لسببين، الأول ديني والثاني جهادي. ديني عشان الأفارقة تاريخياً من وقت الفتح العمري كانوا يجوا على القدس عشان يقدسوا حجتهم، واللي كان يقدس حجته كانوا يحكوا عنه، كانوا يطلقوا عليه لقب الحج المقدسي اللي كان يعطيه مكان اجتماعية ببلده الأفريقي. السبب الجهادي طبعاً كان إنه عشان يدافعوا عن المسجد الأقصى وإلى آخره. وهون بدي أشير لإشي صغير، إنه لما جامعة الدول العربية أسست جيش الإنقاذ لتحرير فلسطين، كانوا جزء كبير من الأفارقة جزء من الجيش، فلما انهزم الجيش ضلوا جزء كتير كبير من الأفارقة بالقدس ولحد اليوم. الجالية إحنا عنا الجالية الأفريقية فيها أمثلة نضالية حية.
كان ممكن توقفي، خليني أترجم هاي بعدين بتكمل الجزء الثاني. So Shaden is a hi Omar, and Shaden is a student at Birzeit University, first-year student at Birzeit University, studying law. I am from the Afro-Palestinian community, and I want to speak about it because I don't think many people know about that. The Afro-Palestinian community actually is based in the main gate to the Aqsa Mosque, the closest to the Aqsa Mosque. The Afro-Palestinian community comes from 4 African countries: Chad, Sudan, Nigeria, and Senegal. The people who are living there now are 2nd and 3rd generation. There are 350 members of the community made up of 45 families. They are built of 2 different neighborhoods, I would say, right? Neighborhood, I would say. One is Mansour, one Alauddin. And this is the area in which the Afro-Palestinian community now lives, was actually created before as prison by the Ottoman Empire for people who are against the Ottoman Empire. The reason there is the Afro-Palestinian community, the reason the Africans came to Palestine and became Afro-Palestinians now is due to 2 reasons. One is religious, and second is struggle. The religious one is that since the Omar, Khalifa Omar, set up Jerusalem and set up the mosque and so on, the Islamic rule of Jerusalem started. People, African pilgrims who were going to Mecca will stop in Jerusalem in order to make their pilgrimage more sacred by stopping in Jerusalem. And that's why they are actually called Maqdisiyin, i.e. Jerusalemites. And so many of them actually stayed after. But the second reason is because they actually came to defend the Aqsa Mosque and to defend Palestine. And when the Arab League of Arab States created in 1948 the Salvation Army from different places and so on, many Africans joined, and actually they are, so this is how they became part of the liberation. And then when Palestine fell in 1948, so we're actually talking about that period, 1947, 1948, when Palestine fell, that's when the African also remained, and the state in Palestine also to be close to the Aqsa Mosque. And by the way, also they were actually also given the property and the ownership and so on. So this is where the community roots start. كملي تفضل.
إحنا كمقدسيين وكأبناء وبنات الجالية الأفريقية بنواجه نفس المشاكل اللي بيواجهوها الشعب الفلسطيني من انتهاكات لحقوقنا الاجتماعية والاقتصادية والسياسية ومحاولات أسرى لتهويد المدينة. ومنها يعني إحنا كتير نتعرض لاعتقالات اللي أدى إنه تقريبا 80% من نسبة الأبناء الجالية الأفريقية تعرضوا للاعتقال أو للضرب أثناء المداهمات. كمان إضافة على ذلك إحنا برضه بنعاني من ظروف معيشية صعبة بالقدس وبالبلدة القديمة بالتحديد، ومن اكتظاظ سكاني ومن بيوت محتاجة لترميم اللي الاحتلال برفض يعطينا ترخيص اللي إحنا نرممها. بدي أحكي على كمان فكرة إنه إحنا الحي قربا من المسجد الأقصى جعلنا دايما إحنا بالمواجهة الأمامية إلى التصدي والدفاع والمواجهة. فهذا كان دائما يؤدي إنه في احتكاك مستمر بيننا وبين الاحتلال وإلى آخره. دراستي أنا ببيرزيت ما كانت هالقد سهلة، مع إني أنا لسه سنة أولى، بس كان في سببين.
كان خليني أترجم هاي بعدين تبدأ على بيرزيت عشان تكون قصة. So Shaden is saying that as Afro-Palestinians, we face the same problems as Palestinians, Palestinian Jerusalemites. And we face other problems because we are also in the old city. We face social, economic, political problems. 80%, approximately 80% of the children of the Afro-Palestinian community have been subjected to beatings, to detention, to imprisonment during Israeli military raids and Israeli police raids also. In the old city in particular, there are specific problems that, for example, the occupation, like it does everywhere else with the Palestinian community, they refuse to allow people to fix the homes. They refuse to give them permissions to build and to improve the homes and so on in order to displace them. Because we are also very close to the Aqsa Mosque, there is also continuous confrontations and with the occupation that they are daily are trying to also displace Palestinians, get them out, and they are confronting us. Now Shaden is going to speak about being a student at Birzeit.
زي ما حكيت إنه دراستي ببيرزيت ما كانت كثير سهلة لأكثر من سبب. أولهم إنه بيرزيت أولا كثير بعيدة، وإضافة على ذلك المعيقات والحواجز اللي بحطها الاحتلال بالطريق هي طبعا بتعرقل طريقي وأنا رايحة على الجامعة. على جانب آخر كان في ضغط اجتماعي بمرحلة معينة إنه أنا ليش أروح أدرس بجامعة فلسطينية، وخصوصا إني أنا من سكان القدس، وأي حدا بسكن بالقدس كتير أسهل إنه يروح يدرس بجامعة إسرائيلية عشان بحصل على فرصة عمل دغري بعد ما يتخرج. فكان هذا ضغط خفيف صراحة بعد ما تخرجت، إنه لا يعني ما رح تلاقي شغل، وهي كتير مشاكل بواجهوها كل طالب تخرج من المدرسة وبده ينتقل على الجامعة، بصفي بين هذا الصراع إنه هو هل يدرس بجامعة إسرائيلية أو فلسطينية. بس هون رجع على العاتق الشخصي إنه لا، أنا بتنازل عن هاي الصعوبة، وإنه أنا جاهزة لهاي الصعوبة إني أواجهها، بس أنا مش مستعدة صراحة أكون بنفس البيئة الموجود فيها الإسرائيلي بنفس الجامعة، ويعني إلى ما آخره. فإذا بتحبي أستاذة دكتورة.
Now Shaden is speaking about being a student, and she said that actually studying at Birzeit University has not been easy. First of all, there are checkpoints and roadblocks whenever I'm going to go to school. They're continuously Israeli checkpoints and roadblocks that make it very difficult to get to school. Secondly, there was actually pressure on me from members of my community saying, why are you going to go study in a Palestinian university, i.e. in Birzeit University? Because if you are going to go study there, it's easier for you to study in Jerusalem. You have a Jerusalem ID. You can go actually to any Israeli university and study. And of course, we're going to be hearing from a little bit from Sahar Francis, who is a graduate from some of the Israeli universities. So we will have contrasting perspective. And why wouldn't you go and study there? This way, it will be easier for you to get a job. If you want to actually have a livelihood and so on, it will be easier for you to have a job when you graduate. And this is actually a problem that faces all the youth from our community, because youth in general, because there are no jobs available. But I said I don't really want to be part of the Israeli environment. I don't want to go to an Israeli university to to study in an Israeli environment. I would rather be in a Palestinian. So, Shaden, if you can speak a little bit about being in Al-Funun, and then we will move on to Sahar Francis next. Go ahead.
اوكي، انا اللي عضوة بفرقة الفنون من 2013. الفنون بالنسبة لي هي زي مجتمع صغير وبيئة بتزرع فيه قيم وبتربيها في وفينا كلنا احنا انه نكون شباب قادرين انه نغير بالمجتمع. الفنون صراحة عودتني على اشياء انا مش متعودة فيها ببيئتي، خصوصا ان انا جاي من خلفية محافظة، ف يعني ما كان مسموح لانه البنت ترقص مع شاب او هاي الاشياء اللي المجتمع بفرضها علينا. فالفنون كانت بالنسبة لي مكان ومساحة بحس فيه أنا بحريتي وبإنسانيتي وبمارسها بحرية، والرقص فيها كان يخليني أحس بحرية، خاصة إنه إحنا بفلسطين ما بنحس بحرية. الفنون إلها 41 سنة، اتأسست بال 1979. وأنا بالنسبة إلي اللي بيخلي الفنون أو أي جسم زي الفنون يستمر كل هذا الوقت إنها ما ولا لحظة تنازلت عن مبادئها. وزي آخر فترة ممكن أشير على إشي صغير، إنه المؤسسات اللي كانت تعطي دعم مالي للفنون صارت تفرض عليها دعم مشروط وتمويل مشروط، والفنون هون بترفض. فأنا بالنسبة لي الرفض هذا هو اللي بيخليها تستمر، لأنه بالنهاية الفن هو وسيلة للمقاومة، والفن هو برضه إشي بيحاول الاحتلال إنه يسيطر عليه، بيحاول يسيطر على الإبداع والخيال اللي بيطلع من الشباب. فجسم كالفنون هو جسم أنا بالنسبة إلي أنا كتير مهم أضل فيه، وهو بضيف لشخصيتي وبضيف لمسؤوليتي بالمجتمع كتير يعني. بس شكرا.
شكرا شادن. Okay, بحاول بالإنجليزي. I will try. It's always difficult to actually be as articulate in another language than the language that you speak. So, Shaden said, I joined, I've been in Fluent since 2013. And this is for me an environment that actually builds in me the values of youth who can actually change things, youth who are agents of change. Al-Funun also taught me a lot of new things. I do come from, and Palestine comes from a conservative place where, you know, girls are not supposed to be holding hands and dancing with boys. But for me, Al-Funun feels like a space that I can feel free. I can dance, and dance allows me to feel freedom that we in Palestine do not feel due to the occupation and colonialism. Funun has been around since 1979. It's a body that continues, and it has never, ever given up its principles. For example, many of the funding organizations, international organizations, try to give conditional funding to Al-Funun, and Al-Funun refuses that. And this refusal is a very important reason for why Al-Funun continues and why we continue to be part of it and why we continue being agents of change. Art is part of resistance. Art is the art of resistance. And this is where we can actually defy the occupation with creativity. And so it's very, very important for me to be part of it, to actually imagine freedom outside of Al-Funun. And of course, I'm going to actually turn it over now and maybe go to, I'm debating whether to go to Sahar Francis or Omar Barghouti, because Omar also was a main dancer of Al-Funun, very much involved with Al-Funun, and also, or to go to Dr. Haider Eid back and talk about the whole question of culture and creativity and art. But I'm going to stick with the plan, be disciplined, thank you, Shaden, and go to Sahar Francis. And Sahar, my questions to you are actually, well, let's start with the way Shaden began to talk about the whole question of not studying at Israeli universities. So you are a Palestinian who grew up in the 1948 areas, and you studied at the Israeli universities, and you chose law, which is now Shaden wants to go into, and you created Ad-Damir. So can you just share some of these experiences about what has it been like for you to grow up in the Israeli colonial law, direct Israeli colonial law? Was it studying? What were the experiences in the university? And what were some of the issues that you've confronted as you set up Ad-Damir?
Hello, good evening. And Thanks a lot, Dr. Rabab. Is it okay, the voice?
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. So, as you said, I was born actually in a small village called Fassouta in the Upper Galilee in the Lebanese border. Very nice place. The real Palestine, I call it. And actually, it wasn't easy. It was so confusing at some point when you grow up and you realize there's something going on, but it should be kept secret. Like I was born in the late 60s, where at that time, anyone who dared to say that he's a Palestinian, he would be like arrested and harassed and so on. So the discussion the political discussion we had at home, we were not supposed to talk about it outside. And I was studying my school in the village also in a very confusing atmosphere, where in the creation, the day of the creation of the State of Israel, you were hanging the flags in class, but when you go home, it's totally a different atmosphere. And then reaching to the university in 1987, just at the beginning of the first Intifada and in Jerusalem, I studied medicine at the beginning for 3 years. It was also very challenging, but then was the moment when my political conscience started to be more built and decided that I want to be active beside being a student. And I was joining demonstrations at that time in the university. But it wasn't like, it was also a very challenging, because you could be easily kicked out of the university if you were arrested and accused of being involved in political activities, especially with some groups that they were defined illegal groups at that time. Later, when I moved to the Haifa University, it was supposed to be a bit more an open university than the university in Jerusalem. But studying law in the Haifa University was also challenging with all the discussions that started to take place, especially in '93 when the Oslo Accord was signed. And this has made me to take a decision that I want to do human rights and especially go back to Jerusalem and to work on the human rights issues. When I came back, I joined first Society of St. Eve. We were based in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem, and we were doing like all kinds of human rights violations, house demolitions, land confiscation, labor rights, freedom of movement, and not prisoners. But when I started to deal with the prisoners, it was because some of my colleagues were arrested, friends that either worked with me in the society or from other organizations, especially in '96 when the demonstrations started because of the tunnel issue under the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And then I met Damir for the first time. Actually, I was not the creator, but I joined the Damir very early when they were founded in late 1991, and I started volunteering with them in '96, actually, where I was still working with St. Eve. But 2 years later, I joined the Damir, and since '98, actually, I'm still in the Damir. I think the issue of the prisoners was the most touching case for me, meeting all these people that they were tortured. In '96, torture was severely used, '97, '98, up till 99, actually, when the Israeli High Court came to minimize a bit the use of torture. But later, as we know, like last year, we again started to document very severe cases of torture. Maybe I'll talk about the issue of the prisoners and more details. on the second round, but I think it's very all this question of the fragmentation and the that was caused after the creation of Israel in 48, the Naqab, actually I think affected us as Palestinians a lot, because we Palestinians who were living inside Israel, honestly, till like mid-90s, we were totally isolated, because we were not able to connect with the Palestinians or Arabs in the Arab countries. We, like, after the peace agreement with Egypt and Jordan, I remember my first visit to Sinai. Like, an Egyptian guy was shocked that I'm speaking Arabic. He expected that I should speak Hebrew because I have an Israeli passport. All this question of identity and who to be, are you Palestinian? Are you Palestinian like the Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Jerusalem, or those in Lebanon? Or are you really Israeli? No, we are not Israelis. All these discriminating laws and all this apartheid system that Dr. Eid mentioned actually makes you feel this confuse of the identity, how to refer to yourself. And like at some point, there's no way that you will not be faced very tough with this discrimination, especially in the university, because for some certain in our villages, in our schools, you don't meet and you don't face this reality very difficultly. But when you go to the university and you start to discover the real discrimination, even in the level of scholarship, which scholarship you can apply to and which program you can study in the university, then you start to realize, I'm not a full citizen here, and there's something. And then you start to build your conscience around the whole issue of your background and your like what you want to reach and where you want to go in all this situation. So this is actually what pushed me to go back to the because I felt I want to do more than just equal rights within the especially as a lawyer, because it was very clear that studying law in an Israeli university and becoming a regular Palestinian lawyer inside the system, even though if I'm a human rights lawyer, but working every day in the Israeli courts, it would be very difficult for me. This is why I moved to the occupied territories. Still, here you would face the system, but from a different angle, not to be very tied to the fact that you are still working within the system.
Thank you so much, Sahar. We will come back to you. I want to say that actually Myssana Morany was going to be joining us, unfortunately, from Adala, to also speak about what's happening with Palestinian conditions in 1948, also from the Adala perspective. Unfortunately, she has been taken ill with coronavirus, with COVID-19, so she is unable to join us. And we did not want to only have kind of like one perspective from each place. We wanted people do not replace each other. So we will be able to address some of the issues. We also hope that all the speakers, all the panelists will be willing to come back and speak to our students, because I'm sure there are so many questions. I have a lot of questions. Every time somebody says something, I have a lot of questions to ask. And I know our students are, and I really hope that you all will be generous and available with your time to respond to our students. Our next panelist is Omar Barghouti. Omar Barghouti, I know you really well, as everybody else. And I wanted, Omar, if you can actually speak about your own background, how were you brought up, your activities in the university, founding ACBI, Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott Campaign, and BDS. And I really also was wondering if you would be willing to share with us some of your own personal experiences, from being forced to live in Akka to being prevented from visiting your mom, Allah yarhamha, when she was really ill, to actually being able to attend the burial. So if you can actually share us, and then you were also targeted by Israeli lawmakers for quote unquote civic assassination. So if you can just share some of this experiences, if of course it's up to you what you would like to share with us or not, but we would really like, I think it would be, the students would really appreciate, and our audience hearing from you. So Omar.
Thank you, Rabab. Squeezing 56 years into 3 minutes is a challenge, but I'll do my best. So I was born to refugee parents. My father's side, refugee from the 1967 occupation. My mother's side, her mother, comes from Safad in the Galilee, so from the 1948 ethnic cleansing. My grandmother's family was ethnically cleansed. They ended up as refugees in Syria. So I grew up as a son of refugees. My father was one of the founders of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, in Jerusalem in 1964. And my mother was very active in the General Union of Palestinian Women as a volunteer. So I grew up in a home where Palestinian identity was very, very clear, although we lived most of our lives in Egypt as refugees. Later, I traveled to New York to study engineering, unfortunately. No one is perfect, at Columbia University in New York. And actually, although I was studying engineering, I wasn't an engineer only. I was active. I became active as a Palestinian student. But my most important experience, perhaps, other than Palestine work, was the South African anti-apartheid work. As a tiny little part of the big coalition at Columbia, calling for divestment from companies involved in apartheid in South Africa, I learned my ABCs of social activism, of political activism, like never before, from the anti-apartheid movement. And I said this story in several talks, but I'll repeat it here because it's very relevant to what affects me as an activist, as a human rights defender, is when I used to hold up signs saying, abolish apartheid, my fellow Columbia engineering students would pass by and say, don't you have anything better to do, like lab work or homework or so on? And then one student once asked me, do you really think this will ever happen in your lifetime, abolishing apartheid? I mean, such a grand slogan. And I said, honestly, no, I don't think it will happen in my lifetime, but I do it out of commitment to internationalism, to a cause of justice that means a lot to me and should mean a lot to everyone who cares about freedom, justice, and equality around the world. But it did happen in my lifetime. Apartheid did end in my lifetime, and that gave me an inspiration like nothing else. This has informed my activism much later on, when I worked with other colleagues in founding the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel in 2004, and a year later, when we founded the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, which grew up to be today the largest solidarity movement in the world with the Palestinian people, and is led by the broadest, largest coalition in Palestinian society in Palestine, as well as in exile. My human rights work in those movements is very much informed by my years of activism at college and all the political atmosphere that I grew up in at home. So to me, talking about the rights of return for refugees is not a slogan, it's something extremely real. Growing up in a refugee family meant that this is it, that's my dream. Everything I dream of is living in Palestine, going back to Palestine. We never visit Palestine, we go back. So to us, return was not a slogan, was something very real for the absolute majority of Palestinians, like Haider and others who are refugees. This is a dream for us. So in the BDS movement, when we called for ending the occupation, ending apartheid, and the right of return, those were not just political slogans to me as an activist. Those meant a lot more than political slogans. They meant the lives and livelihood of every Palestinian. All 13 million of us deserve those rights like every other people on earth. It meant equality for Palestinians to everyone else, that we deserve those rights. But in doing that, I also understood from my days with the South African anti-apartheid movement at Columbia that you cannot fight for justice in one place while forgetting other places. This intersectionality concept that we learned from Black feminists in the US meant a lot to us, that indeed we need to fight together to prevail. Our enemies, the far right, the fascists of the world, the xenophobes, the misogynists, the anti-Black racists, the anti-Jewish racists, the Islamophobes, and so on and so forth, anti-LGBT, all of those forces are very much united today. The far right is very united. Yes, Trump was defeated, or we hope so, but Trumpism has not been defeated yet. Fascism has not been defeated yet, far from it. Apartheid is live and kicking in Tel Aviv. So we have a lot of work to do, but we need to do it together. That's the key lesson I've learned from my years of college, from my upbringing at home with my family. Yes, I've been targeted, but I'd rather not speak much about that because it's minor compared to what people like my friend and colleague Haider has been through, for example, as a refugee, what many others have been through, what Shaden has explained in Jerusalem, what they go through every single day. So it really pales in comparison to the horrific injustices that my entire people live through day in and day out. Real apartheid, real discrimination, real ethnic cleansing, and real killing in the case of Gaza, of so many young lives and older lives and people with disabilities and women nurses and so on, who've been killed for just protesting for their basic rights under international law. So I feel kind of guilty speaking about the threats against me by the Israeli government. Yes, they come from very high-profile ministers and members of the Knesset and the Israeli intelligentsia and so on, threatening me with all sorts of things, but it pales in comparison to what my entire people is being subjected to every single day. So I leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Omar. I know it pales, and thank you for mentioning that. I did want to signal to people who are listening and to our young people and to the students who are listening and watching that I think it's really important, because people see somebody who's active and struggling and so on, and they think that either that you are invincible, that this doesn't affect you, or that you actually, as a Palestinian, you should take it. And nobody gets used to that. So I just wanted to make sure that we are underscoring what does this mean, that when people are here on the panel coming and speaking, people are speaking from real experiences, and they are also speaking from a collective Palestinian experience. With that, I'm going to take it.
Yeah, just one sentence, Rabab, if you allow me. What you exactly said, when we get angry, we resist. We don't allow ourselves just to explode in anger. We resist. They make us more angry, they threaten us, we resist more.
Thank you. And this is this is the title of the event. We're actually from colonization to Sumoud. So the whole question of Sumoud engages with collective resistance. And so anyway, I'm going to turn it over. I'm actually still trying to locate where Dr. Mahmoud Al-Ali from Aidun Center from Beirut is. I'm not sure if there is some kind of electricity power issues in Beirut as well, but we're going to try to actually see if we can bring him in. But with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleagues, Omar Zahzah and Saliem Shehadeh, to take over the moderation of the second round. And so we're going to have the second round, and then the third round, we're going to cut it a little bit shorter in terms of having panelists speak with each other, converse with each other, and with the audience, and kind of like take up questions from the audience and so on. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Saliem and Omar. And thank you all for this amazing introduction.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Abdulhadi, and thank you to all of the speakers in the first round. Some really great discussions, and we're looking forward to building on them more. So just to clarify, partly for technical reasons and partly for kind of a smooth transition, Saliem and I are going to be switching off, asking question by question, following up on some of the things that have been laid out from the beginning. So just to keep the conversation going, I would like to start with you, Sahar Francis. Can you speak about prisoners? Would you please discuss prisoners who are rarely mentioned, including those who were jailed around the partition and Israel's establishment? What does that mean in the context of military rule over Palestinians from 1948 to 1966? And more broadly, can you tell us a little bit about imprisonment, as a tool of colonization, and what do you think solidarity needs to mean based on this reality?
Oh, thank you, Omar. I think since the beginning, since 1948, the issue of imprisonment was used as a tool of control and to maintain the control over the Palestinian first, who remained in occupied Palestine after 48. And as you mentioned, actually, they imposed a military regime over the Palestinian people who stayed in the state. All the Palestinian villages were under a military control, actually up to 1966, which means we couldn't leave our villages without a special permit from the military governor. We were brought to military courts where we were not able to have our own political parties, and lots of details that interfered in our daily life. But the main point on the prisoners level, thousands of people were imprisoned in the time of the war and kept till after the end of the war in 1948 and a bit after the creation of the state, like in the 51. But unfortunately, there's no much information and documentation about that period. Some studies were published by the Palestinian Study Institute actually lately about this period, but not much in between the 50s and the late 60s as a movement. There is, of course, individuals who wrote about their experience. But let me say that Israel kept the the British security regulations, actually, that they were founded in 1945, used by the British mandate to control the Palestinians, the Palestinian uprising, actually, and the resistance against the mandate. And Israel used them as the main tool in order to arrest, to justify imprisoning Palestinians and arresting them, whether under administrative detention or accusing them of violating the security and with serious crimes that they are not loyal to the state, and they are accused of security issues, and hundreds were imprisoned for long years. Later on, actually, after the occupation of 1967, Israel, of course, founded the military regime in the occupied territories that was reflected by the thousands of military orders, and opened the military courts, 5 military courts at the beginning. Nowadays, there's 2 main military courts in the occupied territories, and they implemented more or less the same rules. They used also the British security regulations, and they used more or less the same crimes to arrest Palestinians. Nowadays, there's actually the issue of prisoners is so complicated. I would ask people to visit our website to learn more about the issue of prisoners, of course. Currently, there's around 4,500 Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli prisons. Part of them, they are still from 48 areas, those who were arrested in the late 70s, early 80s, Palestinians who were joining the PLO or who were active with Palestinian groups from the occupied territories, and they were arrested before Oslo, and they are still kept even after so long. One of them is Walid Daqqa, that lately last year he has his first child while he was in prison. Out of the 4,500, there's 170 children that they are under 18, around 40 women, and around 300 50 administrative detainees that they are arrested without any trial. The prisoners are suffering a lot in the Israeli prisons. There's torture, ill treatment on daily level, lots of restrictions and punishments, violations for their own rights and for their families' rights, like the whole visitation issue now under the COVID-19 situation, where controlled and restricted families are not able to visit normally. Those from Gaza, they are totally disconnected from their families, and they don't get any family visits. There's no phone calls. It should be highlighted that Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli prisons don't have any access to phone calls. So in these situations, they are really disconnected from their families and from their relatives. And some of the detainees were affected by the COVID-19. There's a serious problem of the healthcare system that is implemented in the prison is not really, there's a huge lack of health treatment in the Israeli prison system. Some detainees died out of health neglect. Last month, lost his life while in prison out of cancer. And the bodies of the detainees who dies inside the prison would be kept by the Israelis, and they don't give it back to the families to be buried in dignity. I think I can speak a lot about prisoners, but let's keep it more for questions later.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask the next question of Dr. Haider Eid. Can you tell us about the conditions in Gaza, continuing the discussion on prisons? What is meant by Gaza being an open-air prison? And what has historically been the role of solidarity within or regarding Gaza organizing spaces? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saliem, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, you can. Okay, thank you so much. Directly, I want to address your question very directly, and as everybody knows, in the last 10 years, or rather 12 years, apartheid Israel has launched 3 massive attacks, massive wars of aggression on Gaza, or rather on the occupied Gaza Strip. And many of the civilians were massacred by, Israel's indiscriminate bombing, which was condemned by UN experts and, mainstream human rights organizations as war crimes and even possible crimes against humanity. Now, these assaults, and I don't like to talk about figures and numbers, but I have to. I mean, if people don't know, they have to understand that, these 3 massive assaults in 2008, 2009, 2012, and 2014 left over 3,800 Palestinians dead. And predominantly civilians, of whom, hundreds were children and women as well. And another 15,000 were injured. So now here, Gaza has 2 million people living in it. We are talking about, 80% of those 2 million are refugees entitled to their right of return. I mean, they come from, ethnically cleansed villages from 1948. And, so the overwhelming majority of Gazans are refugees who were violently expelled in 1948 by Zionist forces. I myself and my parents come from, as I said earlier, from the village of Zarnuga, which was ethnically cleansed in 1948. In fact, the Givati unit of the one of the Israeli, or rather one of the Zionist gangs at the time, destroyed the village. I mean, they completely destroyed. And so my family, for example, moved to the Nusayrat refugee camp where I was born. But my point, coming back to the to the conditions right now in Gaza, as I said, they attacked Gaza. The Israeli occupation force attacked Gaza in 2009 for 3 weeks, leaving 1,200 people dead. And then, because the international community did absolutely nothing at the time, and I'm talking about official international community, I'm not talking about, civil society, solidarity groups. No, I'm talking about, UN, European Union, the United States of America, etc., etc. They did absolutely nothing in 2009, and Israel thought that it could come back in 2012 and launch another massive attack for 2 weeks, leaving more than 200 people dead. The overwhelming majority of whom were, children. Entire families were wiped out. About 5 families in the neighborhood where I live, the neighborhood of Tel El Hawa. But then we expected the international community to do something. I mean, I said, no, they cannot allow Israel, to go on carrying out all these massacres without, intervening. But the international community did absolutely nothing in 2012. And therefore, Israel decided to come back in 2014 and for 51 days launched, relentless Israeli state terror, whereby Israeli warplanes, and I'm talking about, warplanes F-16, F-35, made in the United States of America, systematically targeted civilian areas, reduced whole neighborhoods, including my neighborhood, and vital civilian infrastructure to rubble, and destroyed, tens and scores of schools, including several run by UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Work Agency, where civilians, including myself, were taking shelter. But the point is that, everything that I have mentioned comes after years of an ongoing, crippling, deadly medieval Israeli siege of Gaza. If you remember in early 2006, in January 2006, we were told that we would be allowed to go and vote for our representatives in the Legislative Council. So people went to the polling stations and voted against the Oslo Accords, against the two-state solution, against the corruption of the Palestinian Authority, and voted for a party they thought that had an alternative at the time. But the point is that the international community did not like it. Israel did not like it. Reactionary Arab regimes did not like it, and they decided to punish the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, but especially, the people of the Gaza Strip. And this is why they decided to allow Israel, help Israel impose a deadly medieval siege. And now the siege has been continuing since 2006, 2007 until today. Now, Gazans, I want to summarize, and it's extremely difficult to summarize the kind of conditions we have to deal with here in the Gaza Strip, but we suffer from contamination of water. 97% of Gaza's water is undrinkable, polluted, undrinkable. Contamination of air, soil. And just to describe what I'm saying, we have, the sewage system, for example. I'm going to give you an example about the sewage system. The sewage system is unable to function due to power cuts, which are necessary. Of course, the electricity is necessary to run the sewage system. But of course, we cannot do that because the only power station that was attacked in 2006 by Israeli airstrikes needs fuel, and Israel does not allow fuel to enter Gaza, which is necessary for the main generators. Medical conditions, and I'm sure you must have heard about, the COVID cases. these days in Gaza. Medical conditions due, of course, to the COVID-19, to injuries from internationally prohibited butterfly bullets that Israeli soldiers used during the Great March of Return. So these injuries caused by those illegal Israeli weapons, as well as from, of course, water contamination, these injuries cannot be treated because of the siege. And in addition to the ban on medicine and other necessary stuff, you have a ban on building materials, and Israel also prevents many other necessities from being imported. I'm talking about, very essential stuff. I'm talking about light bulbs, candles, matches, books, refrigerators, shoes, books. So I haven't been able to, to buy books, sheets, blankets, tea, coffee, sausage, flour, cows, pasta. Add to this the drastic cuts endorsed by UNRWA lately, not to mention, of course, the constant closure of the Rafah crossing, which is the only exit Gaza has to the external world. All of this has led to one of the highest unemployment rates and poverty on the face of Earth. And so the conclusion that we Gazans have reached is that because world community has decided to do absolutely nothing, Israel is intent on destroying Gaza altogether, because, as I said, world official bodies and leaders choose to say and do absolutely nothing. And I think really the only way forward for us, you cannot solve what is called Gaza problem in mainstream media. It's not Gaza problem. It's part of the Palestinian question. It's part of Israel's policy of, settler colonialism and apartheid against the Palestinian people in general. Israel now, the problem is that Israel claims that it is no longer the occupying power in the Gaza Strip and uses this excuse, of course, in addition to the results of the 2006 democratic elections, to intensify its policy of siege and lethal attacks against, our population here in Gaza. And as you know, you mentioned something about the nation state, the nation state law. Israel has decided to become openly an apartheid state by legalizing racial discrimination, and we in Gaza are paying a very heavy price for that as well. And the last thing I want to say is, to talk about a little bit just about, the epidemic that we have to deal with, COVID-19. While many countries shut borders and enforce, closures and so on, we thought that, the siege would help us in a way, because we are already isolated from the world and from the coronavirus. But unfortunately, COVID-19 found a way to enter Gaza, and at the moment we are finding it extremely difficult to deal with the existing thousands of cases. In fact, and I think everybody knows this, we are in deep trouble. We are in deep trouble because the health infrastructure has completely collapsed. Just to give you a very simple example, Gaza has only 40 intensive care unit beds and 65 ventilators for a population of 2 million, which means that we have only 2 ICU beds per 100,000. And as I said, Gaza's healthcare system was already collapsing even before the pandemic. And it's just our stock of essential drugs are chronically low. and Gaza's natural sources of drinkable water are largely contaminated. Electrical system provides sporadic power, and as I told you at the beginning of this meeting, I'm using a generator now, and it will stop running in 15 to 30 minutes. So I will get disconnected, thanks to Israel's policy of blockade and siege of the Gaza Strip, and deep poverty amid appalling socioeconomic conditions is prevalent throughout the Gaza Strip. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aid. I think you and Sahar Francis's comments already are getting us to the point where I think what was envisioned in this event is really understanding the interconnections between different sites and spaces of settler colonization, besiegement, and various forms of colonial aggression, how all of these are not distinct spaces or distinct questions, but sort of a longer tapestry of an ongoing systemic, brutal regime of displacement and dispossession. And so on the one hand, respecting the particularities, but still through that understanding the larger systemic interconnection between everything. So I just wanted to highlight that, even though we're still far from done, because I think it's important to remind and emphasize, to everybody viewing what it is when we talk about from colonization to solidarity, right? Narratives of Sumoud and resistance and resilience. And so with that, my next question will be for Shaden Qaws. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about the Afro-Palestinian community and its historical role in the Palestinian struggle for freedom and justice. What are some of the experiences of living with the Israeli occupation with the proximity of the African quarters to the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Do you think that there are Israeli designs to displace you? If so, how do you resist such designs, and what does Sumoud mean in this context? And we can have translation as well.
مسموع؟
نعم.
اوكي. تمام. اوكي، زي ما قلت قبل، الاوضاع عنا بالجالية الافريقية مش كتير تختلف عن الاوضاع بالقدس عامة، الا انه احنا بنعاني من في اشياء، في ضغوطات لسه زيادة كوننا افارقة، في عنصرية تجاهنا. أولهم إنه الاحتلال بيطلق علينا لقب كوشي اللي هو للسمر، وهو لقب عنصري. ثانياً بدي أشير على إشي، إنه إحنا كجالية أفريقية ما عنا جوازات سفر، ما بيعترفوا فينا الإسرائيلية، وبيحكوا، وفي عنا بس وثائق معينة الإسرائيلية مكتوب فيها إنه إحنا مواطنين أردنيين، مع إنه إحنا مش أرادنا. بدي أحكي على كمان إشي، إنه الجالية تاريخياً كان لها دور نضالي، وعنا إحنا أول أسيرة فلسطينية اللي هي فاطمة البرناوي، وهي كانت من أصول نيجيرية. وكمان بانتفاضة الأقصى، بالانتفاضة الثانية كان عنا أول شهيد بوقع بالقدس اللي هو أسامة جدة. فعنا بالجالية الأفريقية دور نضالي مستمر، وبتخيل اللي بيميز الإشي إنه إحنا مش منتمين لحزب معين أو نشتغل لحزب معين، إحنا أكتر إيد واحدة اللي بيخلينا نركز على الهدف الأكتر اللي هو فلسطين، ومش الوسيلة اللي هي الحزب. ما بعرفش صح في حدا بيحب يترجم.
طبعا أنا بترجم. أوكي، أنا يهمني. كنت بكتب أول Shaden says the conditions in Jerusalem, our conditions there are the conditions of Jerusalem in general, but we also suffer particular pressures, specifically as Afro-Palestinians. There is a very clear racism, Israeli racism against us. The occupation uses a term that we can liken to the N-word. But that's a very racist terminology. Secondly, we don't even have passports. Israel does not even recognize us. We have IDs that say that we are Jordanian citizens, even though we are not. The third point is that the Afro-Palestinian community has had a historical role in the struggle. For example, the first Palestinian woman prisoner after 67 was Fatima Bernawi. I'm going to add that I actually had the pleasure of having an exclusive interview with her, which I will share soon. And she is from Nigerian origins. Also in Intifadat al-Aqsa, Aqsa Intifada in 2000, there was the first martyr for the Palestinians was Usama Jadda, who was from the Afro-Palestinian community. One of the things that are maybe distinguish us is that we do not belong to any particular party. We are all one hand, and we are focusing on our survival and resisting the occupation in our Sumoud.
بالنسبة لمخططات الاحتلال لتشريدنا وما إلى غير ذلك، المخططات ما بتخص شخص معين أو فئة معينة بالقدس، لا، هي المخططات بلشت من زمان، وعملية سرب الأراضي هي فعليا ما وقفت ومستمرة بحقنا، ما توقفت ضغوطات علينا. بالقدس بالذات عنا تكلفة الحياة بالقدس كتير عالية، مع إنه كتير شباب عنا بالقدس عاطلين عن العمل بالذات بالبلد القديمة. وزي ما حكيت بأول جولة إنه إحنا كتير بنتعرض للاعتقال، فبالتالي أي حدا بتعرض للاعتقال بصير في عنده علامة بحطوا له إياها، علامة أمنية اللي هي زي تك، بمنعه إنه ياخد شهادة حسن سلوك اللي هي بيطلبوها بكل المؤسسات الإسرائيلية. وبما إنه المؤسسات الفلسطينية عنا بالقدس كتير قليلة، ما بتقدر تستوعب هالكم الكبير من الشبان والشابات العاطلين عن العمل. بس إحنا كأهل القدس وأهل الجالية الأفريقية بنرفض ومتحملين كل هاي الضغوطات اللي بيمارسوها بحقنا، وإحنا دايما بالذات بين أهل الحي الأفريقي بنساعد بعض ماليا ومعنويا دايما، وفي روابط دايما بيننا وثيقة باستمرار. زيادة على هيك إحنا عنا جمعية بتحاول دايما تساعد بالمجال التعليمي وتوعية النساء والأطفال، وبتعمل تفريغ نفسي بدل ما يضلوا الأطفال بالشوارع وإلى آخره.
Okay. As I should just say that the occupation actually is targeting all Palestinians. It's targeting all Palestinian communities in Jerusalem, and this has started a long time ago. And this is because Israel would like us to leave, and it hasn't stopped. I want to also add that actually standard of living in Jerusalem is very high. It costs a lot to be in Jerusalem. And then combined to that, many of the youth in the old city are unemployed because there is a very high level of unemployment. And as I said in the first round, that there are many of our youth who get imprisoned, detained, beaten up by the Israeli occupation. What happens then is that they add a point to each person. They call it a security notation on their identity cards, which means that they are actually unable to get any jobs whatsoever in Israeli institutions because each one of them requires a certification of good behavior. And once you have the security, you cannot get that. So you're actually deprived of employment. And Palestinian institutions, on the other hand, are actually very limited, and there isn't a lot of possibilities of employment there. However, so we do face pressures, but we have very high level of solidarity and steadfastness with each other. We support each other. We are connected with each other. We also have organizations, groups. We have an organization that actually works for the community, that works with the children to actually eliminate the psychological pressure that they are subjected to so they can continue surviving. For women, all sorts of things that are happening within the community for us to actually maintain our steadfastness.
وأخيرا بدي أحكي إنه بشكل عام سواء النكبة أو قرار التقسيم أو العودة، هاي مش بس كلمات لازم نحكيها ب15/5 أو ب29/11. العودة فعليا هي كلمة لازم تضل حاضرة كل يوم، لأنه إحنا بنعيشه كل يوم، والنكبة ما صارتش بين يوم وليلة ولا قرار التقسيم، وهذا الإشي صار بكثير قبل، وكان في تخطيط للموضوع قبل ما تصير. فبالتالي عودتنا إحنا كمان محتاجة كثير تخطيط ووحدة ونضال مستمر. سواء النكبة أو قرار التقسيم اللي صدر بحكمها. هاي الأحداث دائما بتذكرنا بشو الاحتلال قاعد بيسوي فينا من 70 سنة أو أكثر، وبتذكرنا قديش مهم نشتغل دائما للوطن، وبذكرنا قديش كل يوم الاحتلال بحاول يسلبنا من بحاول يسلب الأرض منا، وإحنا شايفين هذا الإشي كل يوم. ومهم نتذكر إنه التهجير والاستيطان بلش يعني من قبل برضه من قبل ال 48 ومستمر لليوم، وهم لسه بخططوا لقدام. فمشاركتنا بالأعمال النضالية هاي مهم دائما نفكر فيها، ونفكر كيف شغلنا ودراستنا وحياتنا كلها لازم نربطها ونكرسها لهذا الهدف ويصب بهاي المصلحة.
I want to also add that whether we're talking about Naqba or we're talking about partition or we talk about the return, we should not only mention it only on particular days, May 15th or 29th of November. It has to be present all the time in our minds and in our living, because the partition and the displacement and disposition of Palestine did not happen overnight. It took a lot of planning, it took a lot of designs by the Zionist movement. And so our return also needs a lot of planning, a lot of working with each other, a lot of collective work. And we don't have a choice but to work for our national project, because there is Israel, the occupation is trying to actually keep us for a people without a land. And the whole question of displacement, disposition, colonialism, colonization, and so on is going on from 1948 until today. So we have to be participating. We have to participate in our studies, in our daily lives, in everything that we're doing.
Thank you so much. I am going to go ahead and it's a pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Mahmoud Al-Ali. Glad to see you here. My next question is for you. I wanted to ask you to please introduce yourself, your own experiences, the A'adun Center, why you created it, and what do you try to accomplish, and what does A'adun do? What does the center do?
Okay,
thank you so much.
I'll speak in Arabic. Anyway, I am originally a Palestinian from a village called Al-Khalsa, وسموها فيما بعد كريات شمونة الصهاينة عندما احتلوها. وأنا من مواليد لبنان 1950 ومهجر طبعا، وكنت لاجئ في مخيم النبطية الذي دمرته إسرائيل في الكامل 1974. وأنا فيما بعد مختص في الشؤون الدراسية، حيث حصلت على الدكتوراه في علم الاجتماع، واستطعت أن أعلم لسنوات في الجامعة اللبنانية، وقبل ذلك كنت أعمل في الأمم في أكثر من موقع وأكثر من. على أي حال، إن مخاطر التي واجهت القضية الفلسطينية من خلال مسارات التسوية من 1993 فيما بعد دعتنا مع مجموعة من المثقفين والناشطين في الوضع الفلسطيني لأن نؤسس مجموعة تدافع عن حق اللاجئين الفلسطينيين في العودة إلى ديارهم، لأن هذا الموضوع كان مستهدف في مسارات التسوية ولدى الكيان الصهيوني الذي لن يوافق على العودة. وبالتالي أسسنا مجموعة اسمها مجموعة عائدون من أجل التنوير بحقوق الشعب الفلسطيني على الصعيد المحلي في لبنان، الحقوق الميدانية والحقوق الإنسانية، إضافة لحقهم في العودة. وكذلك جرى تأسيس جمعية مشابهة لنا في سوريا، ومن ثم عمدنا فيما بعد إلى المساهمة في وضع حوارات وتأسيس تحالف دولي للدفاع عن حق العودة، وكان منه اتحاد المرأة في الأردن، اتحاد المرأة الأردني، وكان منه لجنة مهجرين داخل في فلسطين المحتلة، وكان منه أيضا كونفدرالية حق العودة في أوروبا، وأيضا بعض النشطاء في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. طبعا كما تعرف أن العودة هي حق.
دكتور خليني أترجم كثير. Okay. Dr. Mahmoud is I'm a Palestinian born in a village, originally from a village called Al Khalsa, which Israel and the Zionists have created and made it Kiryat Shmona, which is in the north of Palestine. I was born in Lebanon, and I lived in Nabatiyah, a refugee camp that was destroyed completely in 1974. Camp, yeah. Refugee camp, Nabatiyah refugee camp that was completely destroyed, and I've been also like made doubly refugee as well. I've studied and I've received a PhD in sociology, and I've taught at the Lebanese University and worked in many other places. But I want to, enough about me, I want to talk about Aidun. After 1993, when there was the Oslo agreement, and we felt that there were very serious risks and very serious dangers that are surrounding Palestinian refugees and Palestinian right of return. So several Palestinian intellectuals and activists and public leaders came together, and in order for us to insist on the right of Palestinian refugees to return, which is something that the Zionist movement and Israel it refuses to accept, and we wanted to emphasize the right of this is what Aidun means, return, the people who will return, who are returning in Arabic. They will emphasize the right of the Palestinian people, Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, Palestinian refugees in general, their right to return. There was another similar association that was created in Syria, which we collaborated with, and also we participate in many the discussions in many coalitions nationally, including the General Union of Palestinian women and in General Union of Jordanian women. The Committee of People who are internally displaced inside Palestine, the Confederation for Return, as well as many groups in the United States and elsewhere. I think Dr. Mahmoud is speaking about the Palestinian Forum for Refugees, Migration, Return, but I'm going to leave it up to you, Doctor.
Okay. I will continue by Arabic again. الموضوع هو متابعة موضوع حق العودة من خلال التحالف بين مختلف أطياف الشعب الفلسطيني، وخصوصا أن الحركة الصهيونية برأيي وبرأينا هي معاداة للإنسانية، لأنها تعمد إلى استحضار اليهود من العالم إلى داخل أراضي فلسطين لاحتلال أرضنا وبلادنا. وهذا بحد ذاته برأينا طبعا كعائدون يشكل معاداة للبشرية، وخصوصا حينما تقوم الحركة الصهيونية لمحاولة جلب اليهود من مختلف أنحاء العالم في أي بلد كان، ويقولون لهم تعالوا هذه أرضكم أرض الميعاد، فهم بذلك يخلقون نوعا من التناقض في بين المواطن اليهودي الذي يعيش في الولايات المتحدة أو يعيش في ألمانيا أو في بلغاريا، بينه وبين المحيط الاجتماعي، ما يسمى segregation، على استنادا إلى معايير لها طابع ديني، وهذا يفترض أنه غير مقبول بمقررات حقوق الإنسان التي ينبغي أن لا يكون فيها تمييز لا على أساس العرق ولا اللون ولا الجنس ولا الدين. وبالتالي فإن ذلك هو مسألة معادية للإنسانية، علينا أن نقوم بالتنوير فيها والدفاع عن حقوقنا في العودة إلى أرضنا.
Dr. Mahmoud is saying that actually so the main issue is emphasizing and stressing and mobilizing for the Palestinian right of return through the coalition building and collaboration among different parts of the Palestinian people, and especially because the Zionist movement is a movement against humanity. One of the main issues of the Zionist movement is to actually mobilize Jews from around the world to leave their own homes and their own communities and wherever they are coming from, segregate them actually, and have them live in Palestine in a segregated space at the expense of the Palestinian people. And in both respects, actually, this is something that is against human rights, against the very important human rights of no discrimination on the basis of color, race, gender, religion, or otherwise.
ولذلك فإن قرارات الأمم المتحدة كانت قرارات مجحفة بحق اللاجئين الفلسطينيين، وبالأخص قرار تقسيم 1907 الذي صدر في 29/11/1947 والذي ساهم في إعطاء مبرر للكيان الصهيوني من أجل قيامه في 15/5/1948، وخصوصا أن قرار التقسيم كان بمعناه هو قرار غير إنساني، حيث أشار إلى القيام دولتين عربية ويهودية. طيب أنت عندما تتحدث عن العنصرية وتقول أن الدين ينبغي أن لا يكون هناك تمييز على أساس الدين أو العرق أو الجنس، وأنت تقول دولة يهودية، هذه المسألة كانت معادية للبشرية، وساهم ذلك في تقسيم شعبنا وتبديده وتبديد وحدته الوطنية وتحويله إلى مجموعة من اللاجئين في 5 من الأطياف الدول العربية وحتى أراضي فلسطين المحتلة، حيث يوجد لحد الآن لجنة حتى مهاجري في الداخل الفلسطيني غير مسموح لهم العودة إلى قراهم وبياتهم التي طردوا منها. وقامت الحركة الصهيونية فيما بعد إسرائيل طبعا بتكريس يهودية الدولة في الكنيسة الإسرائيلي، وهذا معادي أيضا برأينا لموضوع المنطق الإنساني الذي تعتبره معايير الإنسانية غير ملائم مع الاتجاهات هذه. شو أخت رباب؟
بدي أترجم.
طولت؟
لا مش مشكلة، لا and now I would want to add that all the UN some UN resolutions have been taken against the Palestinians are actually anti-refugees, especially the partition decision of 1947 that basically gave justification for Israel to be founded as a racist settler colonial project on our land on May 15th, 1948. The partition decision actually is not a human decision. It's again goes against humanity because it says you have to create 2 states, one Arab, one Jewish. On the other hand, anti-racism says that you cannot distinguish on the basis of creed, ethnicity, nation, and religion, and so on. So if you're saying that you are going to create a Jewish state, that in itself actually goes against the humanity. What it did is actually scattered Palestinian people among 5 Arab countries, and within Israel there is a big group of Palestinians called internally displaced Palestinians. I think it's almost 250,000, and it also now Israel has also gone in and re-emphasizes in the Knesset by passing the nation state law that says that Israel is a Jewish state. So it actually re-emphasizes and reinforces the racism and the discriminatory nature of Zionism.
وفي النهاية نقول أن استنادا إلى ما سبق فإن التضامن مع الشعب الفلسطيني ومع قضيته هو مسألة لها طابع نضالي وإنساني، ولذلك علينا أن نساهم في تعزيز ثقافة حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني في الخارج أينما كان، وكذلك العمل مع هيئات في الدول الخارجية، في الدول الأوروبية والدول الخارج والدول أمريكا اللاتينية وإلى آخره، من أجل تبيان هذا النظام العنصري الذي يقوم على أساس معاداة للبشرية ومعاداة لكون فلسطين هي أرض لشعبنا، وكونهم يسعون من عبر الحركة الصهيونية إلى جلب اليهود وخلق تمييز بينهم وبين المحيط الذي يعيشون فيه على أساس الدين، وهذا مرفوض كما ذكرت سابقا. ولذلك فإن موضوعنا نعتبره هو موضوع دولي، أي أنه ينبغي أن تفهم الشعوب الأخرى والدول الأخرى، أن يفهم هذه الشعوب مخاطر الحركة الصهيونية ومخاطر بناء إسرائيل على البنية الوطنية التي يتعايش فيها الأديان بغض النظر هل كان مسلما أو مسيحيا أو يهوديا.
أوكي، شكرا دكتور. أوكي،
أهلا.
You're muted, Dr. Abdulhadi.
I'm sorry. Dr. Mahmoud went into actually the question of solidarity, which was sort of in the third round. And he said that, as I've said before, this is why solidarity is really, really important with the Palestinian people, because it's part of it's part of humanity. We have to actually, as Palestinians, we have to emphasize and build the whole question of the Palestinian culture, work with other people, work with people all over the world, in the United States, in Latin America, everywhere, to expose the Israel as a settler colonial project that's actually against humanity, that negates the fact that Palestinians, this is the land for the Palestinians where they should be living, and that opposes discrimination. This is an international subject, and internationalism is really important in order to also show and demonstrate to other people why the Zionist movement has also is a danger to all sorts of movement because it is a racist movement, and it's part of racism that negates the possibility of the plurality of religious pluralism living with each other in Palestine and everywhere else.
Thank you so much. Dr. Haider, I see that you've notified us that your generator has indeed turned off, and that you are on laptop battery right now that is dwindling quite fast. So before we get cut off, I did want to give you some time to give your parting reflections before you get cut off, as I don't think you'll be able to make it till the end. So if you wanted to go ahead. You're muted at the moment.
Yeah, all right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. But, you know, this is life in Gaza. Yeah, so the question, you know, on the occasion of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, the question is what is to be done. I mean, and we need to address that. And this is the kind of questions that need to be addressed. And you know, we would like to give some answers. I mean, and being the oppressed in Palestine, and I think that, you know, the international community should heed our call. I mean, should not be lecturing us, but listening to what we have to say. We have a voice. In fact, we have a loud voice that the international community has to listen to, and we think that, you know, it is exactly like what I was saying when I addressed the first question. You know, it took the international community, you know, more than 30 years to heed the call made by the oppressed of South Africa. And you know, the oppressed of South Africa believed at the time that it was the responsibility of citizens of the world to isolate the apartheid system. They worked on that. 1958, they issued the first call until Mandela was released. And the same thing. I mean, likewise, we think that it is a responsibility of the citizens of the world to isolate apartheid Israel through an intensive, I mean, Omar has just mentioned it, intensive, you know, BDS boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign until it complies with international law. And this one, again, this campaign is similar to the global BDS movement that was detrimental in leading to the collapse of the apartheid system, the apartheid regime of South Africa. And this is why, you know, as Gazans, as Palestinians, as Palestinian refugees, we urge people of conscience, all those people who are attending, you know, this lecture, you know, people of conscience and consciousness, you know, to join us in our call for BDS, and I will leave that for Omar to talk a bit, you know, a little bit about, you know, BDS, what is BDS, etc., etc. But we also think, you know, I myself joined the Great March of Return in 2017, 2018, 2019, where, you know, hundreds of thousands of refugees decided march peacefully, demanding the implementation of United Nations Resolution 194, which calls, you know, gives them the right to return to the towns and villages from which they were ethnically cleansed back in 1948. But that was part of, you know, civilian efforts, you know, to draw the attention of the international community to our plight here in Gaza and to our plight as refugees, exactly like what Dr. Mahmoud has just said. There are other creative civilian efforts, such as, you know, the Free Gaza boats that everybody knows about, which broke the siege more than 5 times, such as the Gaza Freedom March, such as the Gaza Freedom Flotillas. And these are just examples of what is required to break the siege, imposed on Gaza, and put that arrogant apartheid, arrogant and criminal apartheid state in its place. Whilst the leaders of the official international community stand, complicit with Israel, we rely on people of courage, people of conscience to join us in our struggle the same way the oppressed of South Africa expected all of us to join them in their fight against the inhumane apartheid regime until it crumbled in 1948. And the only way we can redeem the blood of those who have been barbarically killed since 1948, since the Naqab, is to make sure that their surviving families in Gaza and the refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, Jordan, etc., live, return and then live in a just society where all citizens are equal, disregarding gender, color, race, ethnic, or sexual background and religion. And let me end up by just, referring to what, Archbishop, the anti-apartheid hero, Archbishop Desmond Tutu said. He reminds us that in choosing to be neutral in situations of injustice, we will have chosen the side of the oppressor. And that's why we don't want you to be silent against injustice and to speak out for Palestinians, for Palestine, and for the victims of state terror that have fallen for more than 72 years more than 72 years now. And this is why we want you to boycott apartheid Israel. And thank you so much. And sorry, I have to leave you now because, as you notice, it's dark now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, just echoing that. Thank you again for being with us despite all of the obstacles, and also for making it clear exactly what the root of it is, because I think it's really important for everybody watching to be reminded of that and to be aware of it, because this is what perseverance means, continuing to do this despite all of the obstacles, and at the same time showing to the world, right, that this is what's happening. So thank you again very much. The next question is for Samia Khoury. Ms. Samia, what can you tell us about repression in Sumoud, and how does it manifest itself in the context of other neighborhoods in Jerusalem and its historical and religious role? Do you observe Israeli attempts to divide and rule among different religious communities? What can you tell us about that in Palestinian of all religious persuasion communities' attitudes towards anti-Zionism, basically? And feel free to take those in any directions that you would like. I'm so sorry.
I missed the first.
I think you're muted.
Am I okay now?
So the first part of yes, you're good now. Sorry, what was your question?
I didn't understand what you started saying, the first part of your question.
Okay, sorry. So the first part was just to reflect a little bit about repression and Sumoud and how it shows itself in the context of different neighborhoods in Jerusalem, and also within the historical and religious role of Jerusalem itself. And then
as
just
I had
broadly,
Jerusalem always. Can I speak now?
Yes.
Jerusalem has always had a special place for everybody, whether they were Christians, Muslims, or Jews even. I mean, there was a time in Palestine where everybody lived together, and we were neighbors together, and there was no problem. Until, of course, the Zionist movement started, and they wanted a Jewish state only. And along the years, unfortunately, they have succeeded in creating a reality, and we have failed in in maintaining our reality. But at the same time, justice will eventually prevail, because there is nothing that is so. In Jerusalem, at the moment, they are having a very, very hard time. Jerusalem is, its landscape is changing completely. What's happening around the Haram and the Aqsa and all these areas is completely changing. And pretty soon we start feeling foreigners in our own city. But I feel that they are even going beyond what any human can do, and maybe that's their downfall. But what is disappointing is that the Europeans and the American civil society, or the American administration, is hopeless. I mean, there's no way we can talk about that. And they are not. They keep saying things that they're not against. They're against what Israel is doing. But unless they put sanctions on Israel, unless they take action, nothing will change. Nothing will change. Israel is so aggressive, and it does what it wants, even when people criticize it. And this anti-Semitism now that is coming up to justify that it is whoever criticizes Israel is anti-Semitic. So people don't want to be labeled anti-Semitic. So they shut up and stop. But they have to understand, I mean, the world has to understand that criticizing Israel is because Israel is doing something wrong, and not because it's a Jewish state or because people are anti-Semitic. And they make the world feel guilty because they are criticizing them as Jews. And this is what people, I mean, we've had enough of this Holocaust issue that making everybody feeling guilty. Whereas Germany has compensated for the Jews, they have not only compensated morally, but financially. Up till this day, every Jew that was in Israel from German origin keeps getting a salary up till this day. Israel has not even recognized that it has mistreated us or that did a very grave injustice to the Palestinians. They even have not started the minimum, not to apologize or at least recognize what they have done. So Jerusalem is in a very, very precarious situation now. And if action is not taken very soon, there's going to be a new reality overnight. I mean, things change every day. Every day you go down and take a road, it's a completely different scene. I haven't been going out since the COVID started. Unfortunately, today I had a doctor's appointment. I had to go, and I was amazed. I couldn't believe the streets are changed. Everything changes, everything. And they are not allowing anybody to even make a voice or raise their voice, because they're harassing people, they're imprisoning people. The other day they shot a young man just on the checkpoint without even his doing anything, and they get away with it. How do they get away with it? I don't know. Now, if somebody else did what they did, what they do, the whole world will be up in arms. If a Jew is killed at the checkpoint, the whole world will be up in arms. And that is why we really have to work. And I fully agree with Omar that unless they start feeling the BDS, and we have seen its success in South Africa, unless they do that, there is no way. But we have to work on the sensitive issue of proving that anti-Israel does not really mean anti-Jewish, and it's not anti-Semitic.
Thank you so much for your comments. I wanted to bring it back to Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi. Unfortunately, you got cut off during your introductory remarks at the beginning, but actually we had a few questions for you during the rounds, which I wanted you to be able to get to. The first one being, can you tell us more about the formation of the 1977 November 29th Day of Solidarity with the people of Palestine as an...
Can you see me? Yes, I'm
we can
going
see
to try to be brief so we can all have enough time. Since I'm also the teacher in these classes, so I can always have more discussions with the students. So yeah, I think in 1977, the United Nations passed the resolution that November 29th will be the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I think it's really important to think about the historical distance between 1947 and 1977. And look, in 1947, what kind of countries were members of the United Nations versus 1977, what kind of members were countries of the United Nations. There is now, we're talking about the age of decolonization. I'm going to put it in parentheses because we know as people who are study colonial studies, we study quote unquote post-colonial, if there is something called post-colonial, and questions, let's say, of liberation and resistance, that when you have a larger number of the decolonized countries, which is, I put it in parentheses, this changes the balance of forces and changes the vote. Also, I think it's really important to remember 1977 were 2 years after in 1975, the United Nations passed its famous resolution 3379, saying that Zionism is racism and a form of racism and racial discrimination, which actually speaks also to connect what Dr. Mahmoud was saying earlier. This was, all these decisions, all of this was reflective of the balance of forces on the ground in various parts of the world. And then it was reflecting itself in the balance of forces within the United Nations itself, that now you have many governments that were decolonized, countries that were decolonized, and thus that decolonization was expressing itself in solidarity with Palestine. Also, I think it's really important to also note that at the same time, we are seeing also more resolutions at the United Nations around decolonization, around the recognition of indigenous people in the US, around the recognition around Puerto Rico, talking about the colonial project in 1898 of the United States, of Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, the Pacific, and so on. It's very important to think about that this was also when people were speaking more around the whole question of South Africa, 1976, that's when Soweto, right? That's when Soweto uprising took place. There is all these things, all these powers in the world. And what I'm trying to say is that if we think of Palestine, and none of us are saying that, as isolated on its own, it doesn't really work. It's not even about the question of project of liberation. It's also, we need to think of Palestine as part of a whole international body, which also affirms what my colleagues and other speakers are saying. And that was the reflective, that balance of forces in the world that made us travel in terms of resolutions from 1947 to 1977. Now, has that manifested itself on the ground? No, it hasn't manifested itself on the ground in terms of liberation of Palestine, because also there are other forces at play within the Arab region, within Palestine, within other powers, within the relationship between the US and Israel, within the relationship between various right-wing, xenophobic forces around the world. But that definitely, that resolution to kind of come from colonization of 1947 that took over from the British colonization. People say the mandate, and I would like us to kind of like rethink the terminology that we're using, because nobody ever gave the British a mandate over us. Nobody asked the Palestinians, and they basically colonized. They call it the mandate. They also got the mandate from the League of Nations too, which was also a representative of colonial bodies. So I think this is kind of like where I would say the distance, the historical distance have traveled. And I think it's important for us to note that in terms of our analysis of what does this mean, then in terms of international solidarity and support for the Palestinians.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sorry, Saliem, did you want me to
Yeah, so I wanted to give actually a few I wanted to address kind of one point in the webinar now as well. Is there was a question about kind of going and addressing the question of solidarity, right? And I wanted to we're still going to ask more questions. We're not done just yet, but I just wanted to interject really quickly about I wanted to actually echo what Shaden was saying about the role of kind of Palestinian students and university organizing. And Omar Zahzah actually had a question for me about that too, about kind of the state of the nature of solidarity with Palestine, given kind of my dual role as a Palestinian scholar, like in PhD candidate, as well as a student organizer in that role. And what I wanted to just say was just a few remarks about kind of Shaden, like I totally hear everything that you're saying, and we can actually echo a lot, not everything, but a lot of what you're saying in the universities in the United States, right? Because we're dealing with kind of a subtler colonial project in the United States in and of itself. And these universities in the United States, whether it be land grant institutions or land grab institutions, as people are calling them now, public, private institutions, whatever that may be, is that there's a lot of issues that students are facing. Palestinian student organizers specifically are getting involved in, right? And one of the things that as student organizers around Palestine, a lot of it works on solidarity and coalition too, right? So this is kind of like just general remarks about the way in which like when people are doing Palestine student organizing, they always are centering Palestine in our organizing. But it doesn't stop at the borders of Palestine, if you will, right? The organizing never stops there. So it's always rooted in anti-imperialist projects. It's always rooted in projects that are rooted in community and quality for student education. So there's always fights around tuition and the fact that they constantly raise tuition, affordable and quality housing for students, right? Yesterday I was on a panel and they were talking about 1 in 20 students at UCLA, which is where I'm a campus at, have faced homelessness, right? As a student at a public university, there's issues with access to jobs, resources, having to work multiple jobs in order to pay for kind of the increased tuition and the increased housing costs that also fold into kind of a lifetime of taking on student debt. And kind of that structure of like fighting at these systems of oppression at the same time that they're doing the work with Palestine. And they see it as interwoven because it is politically. And we can talk about it so much about even the divestment works that, Omar Barghouti is going to be talking a lot about later, is the question of like, when we're divesting from kind of like the for-profit prisons and the police, the police exchanges where they send US police force to go train in Israel and then come back and deploy those same mechanisms, and they're paid for those exchanges, right? And one of the things that I also wanted to talk about too was kind of the fight for the academic programming, which we're dealing with a lot at San Francisco State University, but also, at many institutions. So for instance, where are the classes on Palestine, right? In university, US universities, where are the classes on Palestine? And I think there's a distinction between saying that a class is on Israel-Palestine conflict, because that's not a class about Palestine, right? That positions, that positions Palestine as an issue of competing nationalities, when it is not an issue of competing nationalities as we're describing here. It's an issue of a anti-colonial liberation movement, right? So in order to center that sort of analysis, that sort of framework of entering into the question of Palestine, we have to get out of kind of doing it in the area studies framework and conflict analysis framework and all that stuff. And one of the great things that we're also doing is kind of also pushing back at that kind of overused framework of like democratic analysis, right? Analysis of democracy, Israel being a democracy. There's wonderful work that says, no, actually you must enter from the point of analysis, understanding that Israel is a subtler colonial state, right? You cannot if you do not enter from that perspective, any analysis that you give will be incomplete, wrong, erroneous, and lead not towards liberation and justice, but just reproduce kind of an analysis of the status quo, right? And we see this in the United States as well. You cannot approach an analysis of the politics of the US from an approach of the United States as a democratic state. You must approach the United States from the structures of power of the United States being a settler colony, from being a bastion of white supremacy, from these wider structural things. So that was kind of what I wanted to address with that. But Omar, I actually wanted to ask you a question. Omar Zahzah, my apologies. And then actually no, my apologies. Omar Barghouti, I had a question for you. And then we will go and ask with closing remarks with Omar Zahzah, and then have brief reflections from Dr. Abdulhadi, who will then open up this for reflections and Q&A. We have about 30 minutes left, so I think this is great. So Omar Barghouti, hi, nice to see you. Can you discuss what you see in the connection between 4748 and your work on BDS and ACPI? What some might say that it doesn't make sense that we should just be pragmatic, right? What do you think about the narratives and how this is the challenge of colonial, especially in the face of repression, such as anti-BDS legislation and House Resolution 246? What would Sumoud mean here? I know that's a lot of questions.
Okay, thanks. It is, as always. I'm used to Rabab, so many questions. Well, I think the main issue about 1947, 1948, the beginning of the very serious phase of settler colonialism in Palestine. Of course, it started much earlier, but that was the critical moment when settler colonialism in Palestine turned into a much, much bigger project, the project of ethnic cleansing of the indigenous Palestinians. A very important point, I won't repeat what Rabab said, because I think Rabab explained very well the partition plan and what it meant. I wanted to focus on a different point, which is the Zionist movement did not just colonize our land and expel the majority of the indigenous Palestinians. In parallel, they worked to colonize our minds. And that's a very key point that we face in the BDS movement. Ze'ev Jabotinsky, as far back as 1923, talked about this iron wall of despair that the colonizers have to instill in the minds of the colonized. Otherwise, they cannot subjugate them. They cannot control them. He said it's only in the nature of things that the colonized will always resist colonialism. And Ze'ev Jabotinsky, one of the main leaders of Zionism, was very honest. He said it was a colonial project. Unlike now, revisionist Israelis talk about liberation or whatever. But Jabotinsky said it's a colonial project, and the colonized will resist. What he said we have to do as the Zionist movement is to instill in the minds of the indigenous Palestinians complete despair, total hopelessness, subjugate them to immense power so that they'll give up resisting and they'll accept our colonization as fate. So our project in the BDS movement, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions for Palestinian Rights, is not just about contributing to our people's struggle to decolonize the land, but also start with, and in parallel, decolonize our minds. It is very desperate. It's very hopeless. It can seem completely hopeless to an average Palestinian anywhere, or even people in solidarity with the Palestinians. Look how powerful Israel is, with nuclear power, nuclear weapons, armed to its teeth, US funding to the tune of 3.8 billion a year, European Union complicity, India, Brazil, the far right across the world being Israel's best partners, despite being anti-Jewish, but that's a side point. Israel is extremely powerful. So what are we doing? After 15 years of BDS, what are we resisting? What are we achieving? It is so powerful. But people who take a snapshot, that's what I call it, a snapshot of reality, miss the process of what the decolonial process is a very boring process. It's a long process of planting seeds and nourishing them with a lot of love and a lot of care and a lot of persistence in the face of the sandstorms that would kill them. until you pick your olives. Palestinians are very patient people. We plant olives, and we know how long olive trees take to yield fruit. So decolonizing our minds means not being unrealistic, not being romantic, not saying, yeah, we're winning when we're not. Israel is extremely powerful, we realize that. But to see the beginning of victory in the seeds we're planting and what's happening with that process. Let me just give a couple of very quick examples, lest people should think I'm dreaming or daydreaming or night dreaming. A week ago or 10 days ago, Secretary of State Pompeo was enlisted in Israel's war on the BDS movement, calling BDS, quote, anti-Semitic. Again, going back to what Samia Khoury was saying, totally conflating opposition to Israel and opposition to Israel's regime of settler colonialism, military occupation, and apartheid, and calling for accountability on the one hand, with anti-Jewish racism on the other. At the same time, Pompeo, the darling of the Christian fundamentalist Zionists who hate Jews and have an agenda of Jews must convert or die, that's an actual quote of some of their teachings, those who have the epitome of anti-Semitism are Israel's best friends today. So it's okay to hate the Jews and love Israel. That's the new formula. That's the so-called new anti-Semitism that Israel is trying to advocate across the world. And the Mike Pompeos and the Trumps and the Bolsonaros and the Modis and the Orbans in Hungary, all the anti-Semites of the world are united on that. All the far right as well are united on this, opposing Jews, opposing Muslims, opposing migrants, opposing many others, but love far-right countries like Israel, apartheid countries like Israel, because it has power. It shows us how to deal with our migrant problems, with our Muslim problems, with our, and so on and so forth, race problems, and so on. So Israel has become the poster boy of the far-right, while BDS is increasingly being recognized as part of this global progressive wave against fascism, against xenophobia, against white supremacy, and against all forms of racism, including anti-Jewish racism. We're not shy to say that. We categorically oppose anti-Jewish racism, the real anti-Semitism. And in that, we stand with many, many, many Jewish communities and organizations around the world who are not fooled by Israel's attempts to revise, to have this fraudulent anti-Semitism, new anti-Semitism definition to shield itself from censure and from accountability and from sanctions. So to decolonize our minds, we focus that. Why would Israel enlist the entire empire, the United States, in its war on BDS? Why does it have a full government ministry dedicated to fighting BDS with tens of millions of dollars annually, not to mention the lobby money in the United States and elsewhere, including the Christian Zionist lobby? Why would Israel need all this massive power, intelligence services spying on us, threatening us, the diplomatic corps, the propaganda machine, and so on? Why, if we were not impactful? So it's clearly Israel recognizes BDS as having a very, very serious impact, challenging its entire regime of oppression. We're not daydreaming. We're seeing the writing on the wall. And the writing on the wall says Israel is rattled. Its regime of oppression is rattled by our nonviolent movement that is categorically opposed to all forms of racism, that is inclusive, that is intersectional, and that is increasingly connected with the progressive forces that, Saliem, you mentioned on US campuses, the farmers' unions in India, the women's groups in Chile, the progressives across the world, the trade unions, the churches. We're connected with this world of anti-fascist progressive wave in a very intersectional, not opportunistic, in a very principled way. And we are achieving change at the grassroots. 22% of Jewish Americans under the age of 40 today support a full boycott of Israel, according to recent polls. 75% of Americans prefer a democratic state with equal rights for all than a so-called Jewish exclusionary racist state. This is a reality today. So we are making a lot of progress. Is it affecting policy change? No, not yet. So we need to do more work. Again, Haider and others mentioned, it took the South Africans 30 years to start appearing on the world map, the anti-apartheid movement. It took forever. I was personally part of that movement. I know how difficult it was to get Columbia University to divest, and Yale and Princeton and other campuses to divest. It took forever. So we need to work in parallel on decolonizing our minds as well as decolonizing our land in an intersectional way that connects our struggles.
Thank you so much for your comments. I did want to now ask, and we're actually going to have more reflections. So everybody here, before I ask the last question to Omar Zahzah, I did want to say, please put your questions in the chat. I see that there are already a lot in there. I see that there are questions for each of the panelists. So if you look to the right, you'll be able to see them. They're compiled from all the different Facebook channels. So if you want to kind of see that, I'll also put them on the screen when we go there. But before we move into reflections, I did want to ask Omar Zahzah, can you tell us a little bit about the politics and ethics of sending delegations based on your past experience with the Palestinian youth movement and current role within Eyewitness Palestine? What do we need to be attuned to?
Well, thank you so much. And I'll try to answer that as briefly as I can, given the time. But, I think that based on experience is an important clarification, because obviously I'm not going to speak. I don't know if I have the context to speak to everything, but it seems to me, based on what a lot of us know, and based especially on the things that we've heard, when we think about the Palestinian struggle, the liberation struggle, I think first and foremost, it's important to understand that because restrictions of movement, ethnic cleansing, denial of the right of return, blockade, those various forms of constrictions and mobility are such an integral part of the Zionist settler colonialism, and because cultural or religious tourism is often one of the ways in which the Israeli state covers up its colonial nature, it's very important not to think of travel as an innocent or a benign act in and of itself, right? I think it's actually important to move and plan with a sense of ethics and accountability, and to understand the various responsibilities that such a reconsideration brings. So, given that it's done along the lines of situating it as a justice and accountability-centered project first and foremost, I think delegations can also operate as a narrative interventions that disrupt oppressive misconceptions used to maintain the colonial status quo or shore up support for it. But again, I think it really needs to be navigated with intention. So for example, one of the things that Eyewitness Palestine that we strive to do is to really continue to respect a theory of change that directly emphasizes the need for delegates upon the return from visits to Palestine, right, either to become advocates for Palestinian freedom and liberation, to start to become if they weren't already, and do whatever is in their power to continue working towards this goal and bringing others over to the struggle. And again, I think the intentionality and the accountability here really needs to be combined with the sense that restriction of movement is such an inherent part of the colonial process in and of itself. So going is not just an empty opportunity. It's something that comes with a lot of responsibility and accountability that needs to be respected. So we really try to navigate it along those frameworks. And, also in the age of COVID-19, where it's easier than ever simply to rely upon digital resources, we continue to collaborate directly with Palestinians on the ground, letting them film and narrate their own experiences for participants to view and discuss as part of our virtual delegations that we're currently doing. And you can see that on our website, eyewitnesspalestine.org. But lastly, I'm going to try to do this quickly, even though it's a lot, in a slightly different direction. I've also been involved with delegations as part of my work with the Palestinian youth movement. There were at least 2 that I was responsible for helping organize and kind of just lay the sort of conceptual groundwork for. And that was, on the one hand, a delegation of indigenous youth activists from Turtle Island here to Palestine, and then also a delegation of Palestinians, international collective to South Africa itself. And those were very different delegations, obviously, but if you're interested, you can see those reflections from the delegations on our website, PalestinianYouthMovement.org. But in those moments, it's also about the question of accountability coming from the sense of joint struggle, solidarity, and what it means to sort of think about commonalities in relation to struggle, right? So we wanted to think about what it means for delegations to be part of process of kind of fostering that heightened consciousness and that awareness of being in struggle together, right? Coming from different struggles, but at the same time, important points of overlap. How can you think of delegations as a way of also fostering that connectivity? And then also, especially, you know, given the context, you know, as was mentioned, the Oslo Accords, where so many things materially were changed in terms of how we understand, articulate, and just materially experience oppression and struggle and resistance. You know, what does that mean moving forward, and how can we continue to think of an ethical accountability, you know, attitude towards delegations and movement as sort of helping inform an awareness of what resistance and Sumoud looks like moving forward?
Sorry, my mic was muted. Thank you so much, Omar. We just placed the event evaluation form. We asked that before you head off today, that you please take a few minutes after the panel to go ahead and fill out this information. Really beneficial to get your feedback on this. We have about 12 minutes left. We wanted to open it up to round 3. Round 3 was a mix of reflections from the panelists, closing comments, as well as questions that folks wanted to answer from the Q&A session, which we have to the right in the chat function. If folks can stay a little bit past, we can. You don't have to. Completely volunteer effort, but we'd like to open it up to the space for reflections and last comments, as well as addressing questions from the audience.
So maybe 2 minutes for each person to go around, and just calculate that Mahmoud and Shaden are going to need translation.
Maybe we can start with you, Sahar Francis, if you had some reflections that you wanted to share with us.
Yes, I think after all the interventions of the colleagues, it's very important to highlight that today the reality shows that Israel actually is acting as a colonial state in both sides, in 48 areas and in the occupied territories in 67, on all the levels, in house demolitions, imprisonment, target killings, all the different strategies and policies. If you compare, there's lots of similarities, and especially if they are really going to continue with the annexation plan and to finish the deal of the century plan, as Trump was declaring. So I think that our struggle should take in consideration that without accountability, a serious accountability, there's no justice. And accountability in the light of the failure of the international community, especially in the UN level and in bodies like the International Criminal Court and other Security Council decisions and so on, if they don't really reach a point where they impose sanctions on Israel in order to enforce Israel to respect law, then we, the people, the movements, the anti-colonial movements in the world should join efforts and put an end for all these war crimes and crimes against humanity that are committed daily on the Palestinian, in whole the Palestinian land. So this is why the PDS movement becomes a very, very, very important movement to be active and to join, as I think this is the most flexible tool for anyone in the world that can use. It can fit for the prisoners issues if you're interested in supporting prisoners. It can fit for agriculture sector, for health sector, for education and academy. You can find yourself in every way if you're interested in a specific area to join and to support the Palestinian struggle.
Thank you so much. Dr. Al-Ali, did you have something that you wanted to share?
I have suggestion,
Final
which we
reflections?
are doing here in Lebanon. احنا في عنا اقتراح من اللي بنعمله بلبنان بالتعاون مع مؤسسة عامل سنويا نعمل دورة بالقانون الدولي وحماية اللاجئين. نجيب اختصاصيين يتحدثون بالقانون الدولي وكيفية حماية اللاجئين مع التركيز على وضع الفلسطينيين. وهذه المسألة ندعي لها شخصيات خريجي جامعات حقوقيين وناشطين في الهيئات المجتمع المدني، ونقيم هذه الدورة. طبعا لا نأخذ منهم نقود، يعني نحن كعائدون نتكفل بذلك بالتعاون مع مؤسسة عامل. وهذه المسألة تنير، لأنه إحنا ندافع عن حقوق اللاجئين، وبالتالي ينبغي أن يجري تنوير وتوضيح بهذه الحقوق بحيث تتحول من شخصيات فردية إلى حالة عامة تتوسع في الميادين، مختلف الميادين. ولذلك نقترح عليكم أنه إذا بصير في ندوات في حيث يقيم النشطاء الفلسطينيين لتوضيح هذه المسألة، لأنه كما أشرت سابقا أن القضية الفلسطينية هي قضية دولية، لأنهم يحضرون اليهود من مختلف أنحاء العالم ويقولون لهم هذا وطنكم وهذا معادل للمفاهيم الإنسانية. وفقط شكرا.
I'm going to translate now. So Dr. Mahmoud Al-Ali suggests that there is a project that Aidun does, which is in collaboration with Amel institution, that they provide seminars on international law and protection of refugees. They bring in together, actually this is the way we do it, with people who are experts in law, scholars, activists, civil society. They bring them all together in order to speak about the whole question, educate and speak about and advocate for the right of refugees. That is not as an individualistic or an individual project, although there are individual rights for each individual refugee, but also as a general cause for people, for humanity, for everybody else, because it is, and because also Zionism is an international racist movement.
Thank you so much. For the sake of time, Shaden, can I ask you if you'd like to provide your reflections? Thank you so much.
اوكي انا برضه بس بدي اضيف انه كتير مهم دايما تكون القضية الفلسطينية والقضايا الثانية المنافية لحقوق الانسان منتشرة دوليا وإلها صدى عالمي، لانه بالنهاية كل هاي الأنظمة الاستعمارية ما اجت من فراغ، ودورنا احنا كبشر ان ندافع عن انسانيتنا وحقنا. واحنا كفلسطينيين ما بنتوقف ما بنوقف بانه بس نحارب الاحتلال الصهيوني والاسرائيلي، احنا بنحارب الانظمه اللي اكبر منها واللي هي اللي جابت الاستعمار، واسرائيل هي مش يعني هي بس تبعيه وجزء منها. فبالتالي احنا دائما حركات التضامن العالمي وفعاليات التضامن العالمي مع القضيه الفلسطينيه بتعطينا دافع محفز بانه نستمر بالحراك الوطني والنضالي والانساني. كمان بضيف إنه حركات زي حركة المقاطعة العالمية الBDS بيجي دورها وبتيجي أهميتها بإنه عن جد يعني لما كل حدا يحس بمسؤولية المقاطعة وإلى آخره بيصير في حس جماعي، بتخلق حالة اجتماعية وحالة عامة لتخدم الوطن ولتخدم هذا الهدف. وأخيرا بدي أحكي إحنا برضو كأفارقة فلسطينيين دايما بنعزز علاقاتنا مع الناس اللي بيجوا من برا وبتضامنوا مع القضية الفلسطينية زي Black Lives Matter والناس اللي من جنوب أفريقيا اللي بيجوا واللي بيرجعوا لنا الصلة وبنحس بالتضامن بيننا وبينهم لأن قضايانا مماثلة إلهم.
Okay. Shaden, I would like to add that it is really important to express solidarity and to actually promote education and consciousness awareness around the whole world both because the colonial regimes did not come out of a vacuum, just like what's going on. So Palestine is not only fighting Israeli occupation, it's also fighting larger colonial groups, and that's why it's really important to express solidarity. Second point is really, really important to promote and advocate for the BDS movement, and both because it's really, really important to hold Israel accountable, and also because it also creates a collective sense of purpose for people coming together. And third, as Afro-Palestinians, we also work in order for us to also consolidate, like other Palestinians, with the relationships with people who are struggling in the United States, in South Africa, everywhere around the world. And this is how we can actually create solidarity and move forward.
Thank you so much. Omar Barghouti, would you care to leave us with some final reflections?
Sure. I want to answer the question that many have thought about, which is, why should an average American care about Palestine, about BDS? Don't we have enough devastation after 4 years of Trumpism in the US? Why would we worry about Palestine? Why should we care? And it's a fair question. But the point is, we cannot look at the devastation in the United States because of COVID, natural disasters, and very unnatural disasters called Trumpism. The devastation there is connected to an agenda of militarization, securitization, neoliberal austerity, which is supported also by the right wing of the Democratic Party, obviously. It's not just Trump, it's Trumpism is also alive and kicking in the Democratic Party leadership. This is connected. Israel's war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated against Palestinians, its apartheid regime, its settler colonial regime, is part of this system of global oppression that we all must fight together. So the Black Lives Matter movement has led this uprising against systemic racism in the US, and they see what Malcolm X realized very early on, and Martin Luther King recognized later in his life, that this is connected to imperialism outside. This is connected to US militarized hegemony outside. It's connected to the 1% getting richer and richer and richer at the expense of everyone else. We cannot resolve the problem of systemic racism in the United States separate from other justice struggles around the world. We are connected. When you elect a US president, you're electing the next emperor for the world. So we do care what happens in the US, because empire rules all of us, and the 1% that rule the United States rule the rest of us as well. So we must resist together, in tandem, in sync, in harmony, according to ethical values that they've destroyed, that the far right is destroying with their xenophobia and horrible racism. We must fight back ethically, in a principled way that sees our justice as truly, as Angela Davis says, as indivisible. To end, Martin Luther King once said that boycott at a very basic level is withdrawing cooperation from an evil system. Just think about that. It is not a charitable act to cut US complicity, to cut US military funding to Israel, to end support for apartheid academically, culturally, in sports, and economically, and so on. It's a profound moral obligation to do no harm. That's the very least we can do. If we cannot stand in active solidarity, at the very least, do no harm. That's what solidarity starts with, and it then evolves to more advanced cases of BDS. Thanks.
Yes, please. Sid Samia, would you like to speak?
Quotation, which to Omar's comment from Dr. Martin Luther King, when he said, "We are tied together in a single garment of destiny. We are caught in a network of mutuality, and I can never be who I ought to be until you are who you ought to be." And I think this is exactly what expresses the understanding of solidarity. We all live in an island, and we're so connected, And I just thought it would emphasize the point that Omar was trying to say. I use this in this quotation in my book, Reflections from Palestine: A Journey of Hope, when I gave an address one time at my university. And I think it's very important for people to feel that. And we have really moved from armed struggle to civil disobedience, and now it's peaceful resistance. And if people cannot understand how much we have sacrificed, then we are in a bad situation. The world is in a bad situation. Thank you.
Dr. Abdulhadi, would you care to share closing thoughts?
Okay, I'm going to share very quickly. First of all, I'm thrilled that we have been able to have this incredible panel. I'm always left that we don't have enough time, and we have a lot. I blame myself, of course, but I also take responsibility for it because I think it's really great to be able to present such amazing richness and diversity of Palestinian lives and experiences and perspectives with people who can understand two things. One is that it is quite rich and diverse, and two, it's really about justice and injustice. So it is complicated and simple at the same time. That's one. So we've had Palestinian, we moved through different Palestinian geographies, and I think we've tried to center Palestinian voices, Palestinian perspectives. This takes me to the second point, which is the question of solidarity. And solidarity, I think, is really, really important. Some people think of solidarity as a fluffy concept, and sometimes Palestinians say we're not in solidarity with each other. But I think it's really important to go back what solidarity means from the 18th century, when it's a concept that came out of workers' solidarity with each other. Actually, people coming together to fight for their shared interest and what they needed to do and what they needed to accomplish. So I think if we think of the solidarity in that sense, there are a couple of issues. One is that we do need one of the main components, one of the main ingredients for people to actually fight and win is to be able to care for the community and to care for each other. Both to care, so we can infuse more love and support. And I'm saying that, and I know people may say this is not really a material concept, love, but I would insist that it is a very important concept. Love and care for each other and for humanity really has to be part of it. And secondly, the ability to be able to understand and step aside and allow people whose voices are at the center of it to speak and articulate what they need and express solidarity with them and support. So this is our two issues that I think really important. The third question, I think it's what I want to take away from this conversation, is that it is definitely frustrating that we did not cover, and every single time somebody says something, I want to jump in and ask. I mean, I want to also ask more questions. Not only have my students ask questions, I want to ask questions too. But I think we need to see that as a beginning. And I guess I would not even say as a beginning, as a continuation, because I don't want to say that this is the first and this is not the last. This is an ongoing, this is part of the impact and the work and the hard labor, intellectual labor, in addition to the actual labor and the actual resistance that has been very much part and parcel of the Palestinian movement from its inception, whether people want to date it before the colonial project, the Zionist colonial project began, or after 1947, or after 1948, or in the 60s. This is part and parcel thinking, articulating, debating, disagreeing. There are nuances that are going on. Pay attention to all of these nuances and understand and go back and think about the narratives of steadfastness, resistance, and resilience that we want to actually talk about. We're not, like Omar says, it's not really a question of being optimistic on false hopes. It's not utopian. It's actually a real thing. Every social movement has always succeeded when people believed in what they were trying to do. Nobody joined the social movement who they believe that they're actually going to be defeatist, which is exactly why colonial narratives are narratives of defeat, submission, and subjugation. colonial, and this is why also internalized colonialism becomes part of colonial narratives. And the reason I'm emphasizing these points is because we are an intellectual site. We are here offering an open classroom so we can discuss together in the best way we can between students, activists, leaders, organizers, people around the world. How is it that we can understand certain things first? What do we make sense of them? Where are the points of disagreement? Where do we go forward? And what is it that our responsibility after we know what we know? What does justice-centered knowledge production then lead us to? Do we stand aside and do a nothing, like Haider said, the whole question of neutrality? Or is it actually our responsibility? Not it would be nice to do so, but it's our actual responsibility to act on justice and injustice and advocate for justice. And the last one, I would say, this is why it's really important to institutionalize the gains that we made. Whether we're talking about the institutionalization for the Palestinian movement and the boycott, divestment, and sanctions as a way to hold Israel accountable towards liberation, towards Palestinian liberation, towards return, towards Palestinian people achieving their just rights for self-determination as part of the human liberation of the indivisibility of justice. And secondly, as part of actually thinking about how do we teach about what we teach and what is it that we need to do, and how is this really a legitimate project for the intellectual academy? This is not something outside of it. This is not something that we can stand aside. And how does it produce for all human liberation? So I want to leave with that. I think I'm frustrated, but I'm very happy. I'm really happy that we're left with more questions. And I think, and I really want to thank the panelists. I want to thank you both. I want to thank Anais. I want to thank the co-sponsors. I want to thank Sarah for creating the, I want to thank everybody who tuned in today on a Sunday. I want to thank everyone to actually make the concept of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people as a site from which we think, we critique, we resist, we liberate, we move on to a better life.